Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have joining us today a new crew, a new mix. I don't think we've never had this before for sure. We have our head coach, Chad Timmerman. How you doing, Chad?
I'm doing well, everybody.
Yeah, good to see you. We have Orange Seal Off-Road Specialized Alex Wild.
Hey, everyone.
And another member of the Orange Seal Off-Road team, we have Hannah Finchamp with us. Hey, Hannah.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. You were on during the Leadville kind of like composite episode, or national championships and Leadville composite episodes that we did, where we interviewed the pros to see what they were doing for those big races. And now we get to have you on for a normal episode. It's exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah. So first, before we get any further, we have to say congratulations to Amber. So Amber and David, they had their little one. Her name is Berkeley Vren Pierce. She was a healthy little baby girl who looks entirely like Amber. It's crazy. I don't know how they do that. It's like if Amber was baby form, this is it. But Amber went through 72 hours of labor. Of course, Amber would, right? She's able to do that.
That's an endurance athlete through and through. Why do it in 12 when you can draw it out to 72?
Hey, you didn't have to do that, Amber. You could have done it for less. You could have made it a sprint. Didn't need to make it a whole Grand Tour stage. So, but congratulations to Amber. Super exciting. If you're joining us on YouTube right now, you can express your thanks or congratulations to Amber too in the live chat. I'm sure that she'll end up seeing this, and it's just super exciting. So congratulations to Amber. And for those that don't know, she's obviously very much on maternity leave, and whenever Amber's ready, she'll be back on the podcast, but we wish her the best. Super exciting. The Successful Athletes. Yeah. Congrats, Amber. Successful Athletes podcast. Want to mention that really quick. Last week, I got to interview the guy that beat me and won the national championship that I wanted to win at nationals, which was, I know, right? I was hoping that I'd interview him and he'd be like, I have these crazy tactics and I use this rare chain wax. And like, I was hoping he'd have all these tricks. He's like, nah, I use
this program you've never heard of called TrainerRoad.
Yeah. He uses TrainerRoad and he follows a mid-volume plan, and there's really nothing else. And he's even from Florida, yet he won at 10,000 feet. So I was hoping that he'd have like all these like aces up his sleeve that, would explain the fact that I just got completely demolished by Matt Dawkins, but no. Matt's just a normal athlete like the rest of us who just manages to really nail his consistency. He has a few things that he does to make sure that he's kind of in top form, even training in a place like Florida to race in Colorado. So you can check that episode out, the Successful Athletes podcast. The link to that is in the description of this podcast or this YouTube video, however you're watching and joining us. And next week, we're going to talk to Angela Chang. She has a very demanding job. She's, I believe, like a tax partner at a huge firm or a partner at a huge tax firm. And she has, I think they have 3 kids or 2 kids. And she decided to take on the BC Epic 1000, which is a 1,000 kilometer. Cool. I'd rather call it a mountain bike ride than a gravel ride, even though it's technically a gravel ride. But if you ride it on a gravel bike, you just get destroyed because it's so rough and it's so hard. And it's a multi-day event, and she took it on, used TrainerRoad to prepare for it. It's really cool. It's an inspiring episode to hear how such a person with so many different responsibilities took on such a big goal. It's really cool. So, and also congratulations to Megan Hakkinen, who won the BC Epic 1000. She's been on the Successful Athletes podcast before. She uses TrainerRoad. She's the 24-hour world champion as well, a time trial world champion. And she won BC Epic 1000. She did it in 2 days, 646 miles of rough terrain in 2 days. So absolutely stunning. Can't believe that. Yeah, really impressive. If you want to use adaptive training, you can go to trainerroad.com/AT because the beta is open for everybody. You can just opt in and use it. Please do that. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to make Hannah blush for a short period of time. I want to go over, Hannah's accolades and Hannah's achievements. So first of all, she has a degree or 2 degrees in athletic training and exercise science. She's a certified licensed athletic trainer as well, and injury prevention, evaluation, rehabilitation. Her experience prior to being a professional mountain biker and one of the best mountain bikers in the USA, she also raced triathlon for 10 years in ITU, Draft Legal Tri, and Nexterra Off-Road. So for those that don't know, Draft Legal ITU Tri is super exciting to watch. It's so much fun, especially a lot of the newer formats that are coming out now where they kind of do like like very short laps and almost like out and backs that they do on certain things. It's been like watching Louis Vincent and all those incredible athletes. It's super fun. And you also swam and ran D2 in college, and you competed in collegiate cycling. But your junior year in college, you shifted over your focus to the bike. So Hannah, you have like a huge amount of experience to add to the podcast. This is going to be great. So,
thanks. I'm excited.
Yeah. Where are you based out of too? So then people get like a point of reference for when you're talking about your training and everything else.
I'm based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. I've lived here for 3 years now.
And where do you, I should say, what's your main focus? Because you do gravel races, you do everything from short track and like epic rides, so like marathon mountain bike races to cross country Olympic. What's your main focus?
I'd say right now I'm really focused on the cross country XCO format because I have a big Olympic dream. So I'm really pushing towards that, but I'm a racer through and through, and we have so many different types of fun racing in the US that I don't think I'd ever be able to limit myself to one. So that's why I love to do it all. But if I had to say like, oh, this is what I'm gunning for, it would be that XCO format.
Pretty impressive that you still had a knockdown drag out battle with Katarina Nash at Belgium Waffle Ride San Diego, even though you're training for the short distance stuff too. So
it's
pretty awesome.
Katarina and I have had a few of those in many different formats. So
no doubt. And teammates with Alex. So awesome to have more of the Orange Seal crew. Chad, we should probably go straight into Sean's question, the Sean Irving one. And actually, before we do that, if you're joining us on YouTube, you can put in your questions now, by the way. We have Jesse and our Jesse Fortson, one of our awesome writers. He's in the chat. And we also have Maxine, our podcast producer, and they'll be calling through those questions and end up and putting them into the docs. If you have any questions, put them down there. We'll hopefully have some time for live questions today. But somebody named Sean Irving on the forum brought up something interesting. Do you want me to read through that, Chad? His response that he said?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. This is regarding last week's podcast, and we were talking about this theoretical, amazing world where you could train at like 7,000 feet below sea level in a hyper oxygenated environment by controlling the pressure and oxygen that you are training in. And as a result, train like the Hulk. And then after that, recover at normal circumstances, I guess. Anyways, that's what we were talking about. And Sean says, in the latest Ask the Cycling Coach podcast, the host discussed at some length the prospect of doing key sessions of supplemental oxygen to increase work capacity. Coach Jonathan seemed particularly excited by this. I still am, Sean. Yes. He says, and concerned about potential musculoskeletal damage from increased work capacity. And this is like the thought process that like since you could have so much more readily available oxygen, or you could possibly push yourself further than what your muscles are conditioned to doing. And as a result, cause harm to yourself. Right. He says, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm not sure this would help at sea level. Below is a theoretical argument based on physiology rather than a data-based study. So feel free to prove me wrong with some solid data, Chad. So he basically is saying that at sea level, that's not a concern, right, Chad? And then he went on to share some more stuff, but you had something to share on this.
Yeah. So Sean apparently clearly has a pretty good understanding of this, maybe a really good one. I don't know what his background is, but he brought up some very salient points and talked about, how hemoglobin, the affinity for it grows as you add hemoglobin molecules or oxygen molecules to hemoglobin, that there's a little bit of oxygen in the plasma or actually in the bloodstream, actually dissolved in it. Certain things that tip me off to the fact that man knows where he's coming from. And Sean, to be honest, I was hesitant to bring up this point because I wondered the same thing. It doesn't really matter if, more oxygen somehow could get to the muscle, but bounces off the muscle. If the hemoglobin myoglobin is already saturated, how can it can't accommodate more. So I too was confused about this. And the only thing that gave me just a little bit of pause was in my research, came across a study from 1989 by Powers, and I've linked to it. And I've linked to it more because I want you to take a look at it and tell me what it means, rather than me try to tell you what I think it means. But there was one sentence in particular that said, incomplete pulmonary gas exchange contributes significantly to the limitation of VO2 max in those highly trained endurance athletes who experience exercise-induced hypoxemia during exercise at sea level. So they shifted the blame to something else other than the muscle capacity. So they went on to elaborate and said that a true VO2 max ceiling in elites may not be down to metabolic capacity of the muscle, and that the higher the VO2 max, and I'm paraphrasing now, the greater the importance of this pulmonary gas exchange. So the idea being that the limitation is in the lungs and not at the muscle, which was news to me. And this is news coming, 30, 40 years ago. So this has probably been gone over and explained by now many times over, but I don't know. I don't understand it. And the fact that they're still doing hyperoxic training makes me think there's probably something there. Otherwise they wouldn't be wasting, researchers wouldn't be wasting their time.
Super interesting. That also brings up a great point that many times when we talk about any process in the body, we focus on one function or one mechanism in a very long chain of things that need to happen. And many times we'll really open up the bottleneck in one spot, but that's really not productive in terms of actual outcomes because the bottlenecks remain on either side of it. Yeah,
it's fun to tease out a single mechanism and try to lay the blame at its feet, but it's seldom, and it's never the only thing at play.
And another metaphor for that would be like, imagine a really busy, the 405 freeway in LA, and it's just completely blocked. And you're like, well, you know what we're going to do for 1 mile of that freeway, we're going to add another lane, just 1 mile. And you'd think that, that obviously isn't going to fix the traffic problem. Right. But that's kind of what we do in a lot of cases. We're like, oh, I need to take this supplement because that's going to fix this one bottleneck in a very long process of issues. And that's going to change everything, but it doesn't because of the fact that bottlenecks reside on either side. We're so complex.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. I wish that we were more simple than that. It would just be plug and play and change it all out. So, but yeah, anyways, so we love the interaction that we get in the forum too. And especially like this one, Sean, fantastic way to bring science and bring some really good insight into this. I love it. That's really
I should also mention that you bring this up. Greg Dumanoir, who we've interacted with a number of times, friends of the podcast, personal friend. He has a super firm grasp on this. I'm pretty sure this is what he did his dissertation in. And so he will certainly chime in if he hasn't already into this particular conversation. He's told me he's going to clarify some things that I didn't understand in last week's podcast. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. So we're going to get into tons of stuff, fun, rapid fire stuff, everything across the board. We're going to talk about the fact that Alex Wild is now training. He used to call himself Mr. 4 hours, and now he's way beyond that, and he's training a bunch.
This is such a myth. I don't know who started calling me Mr. 4 hours, but I just said the longest ride that I did was 4 hours. So everybody just...
It's your brand now, Alex. So
yeah, no.
But he's far exceeding that. Now we're going to talk about that, tons of stuff. But before we do that, let's get into the deep dive topics. We're really good at, so there are two questions that interestingly at first seem unrelated, but then once we looked into it more are actually directly related. So I'm going to read both questions, and then it's going to lead us into the main discussion, what we talk about really on the effects or the energy cost of recovery, amongst other things as well. So from Sean, he says, I noticed Pogacar, that's Tadej Pogacar, he's the pro cyclist that won the Tour de France again. He says, breathing pretty heavily during one of his interviews, which was like 5 to 10 minutes after the stage ended. I'm curious to hear what the body is doing with this elevated respiration. Are the VO2 down kinetics, which we'll explain what that term means in a little bit. He says, are the VO2 down kinetics simply too slow to recover from a maximal effort within this time? Is the aerobic system still running to reprocess byproducts of anaerobic effort? Is it recovery and repair of damage? Is it residual stress hormone in the blood simply existing? And then Zach, so there's that question, which basically, why are they still breathing? And this happens not only in cycling, you see it in the Olympics too. You see it in any sort of sport. You see it with football, soccer, anything. It's not uncommon to see athletes that are out of breath. And in your mind, you're like, these are wonderfully fit athletes. Why are they still breathing like this? They should just, as soon as the activity ends, rev right down. Zach, his question says, we regularly discuss the amount of calories that we burn during a ride, usually ideally based on the power. But how much extra energy does our body have to use during the rebuilding phase following training? Specifically, all those improvements that we're looking for in our enzymes, new mitochondria, oxygen transporters, et cetera, that correspond with us getting faster. So this is one of that question is fantastic because I feel like it's a very commonly misunderstood point. We all know that like recovery drinks exist, and we should take them. But people don't consider that once again, we think of our body in terms of light switches. When we train, we burn. When we don't train, it's off. And that is not accurate. So once again, we get a fantastic way to look at what happens to our body after these efforts, right, Chad?
Yeah.
So where do you want to start with this one, whether it's with the VO2 stuff or anything?
It all overlaps so much. Let me just give quick answers to both Sean's and Zach's questions. First off, Sean, yes, everything you said there is a component, and I'll detail that in a minute. So way to think that one through, because you got almost every point I'm going to bring up. And then Zach, turns out you can actually quantify this really specifically if you want to, and if you're in a lab. But the point is, it's something we can look at. And up until these questions had been asked, I'd wondered both these things, and going through the questions and trying to squash as many questions with one answer as possible. I didn't think these two would be a couple that I could pair together. Turns out they very much are. Okay, so let's start really basically and just remind ourselves that exercise intensity and duration yield training load, right? Intensity times duration equals load. And this is what's often termed homeostatic stress. So basically anything that disrupts our homeostatic state is something that takes us away from a point we want to return to. So we could put it a little more scientifically, or equally as scientifically, and say that it's a disruption of both physiologic and metabolic processes, but it takes place during and after exercise. And I think that's what a lot of people lose sight of, is that even afterwards, like Jonathan said, it's not a switch we just turn back off. So we could kind of reduce these two questions to two other questions and ask ourselves, in what ways are we pulled away from homeostasis? And then secondly, how quickly do we recover from this excessive stress, or this exercise stress, this homeostatic disruption? Okay. So the answer is, well, I'd like to say simple, but it's anything but. We look at the pattern of energy expenditure that follows exercise. And one way we can do that is by analyzing what's termed EPOC. And that's what I'm going to call it from now on, because what it stands for is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Long-term, I'm not going to say that every time. So get cool with EPOC. And it's just what it says. I mean, it's excess. So more than we'd normally utilize post-exercise comes after O2 consumption. Okay. So it's really a measure of the energy necessary to return us to baseline, get us back to where we started, reestablish that homeostatic state. And it measures oxygen to calculate calories burned. And in doing so, we can calculate the actual energy expenditure. We can put a number on it, assuming, we're actually measuring it, which is something that has to be done in a lab. So if you harken back to a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about VO2 on kinetics, this is similar to how on kinetics relate to oxygen debt, in that when we ramp up our effort, the oxygen system, the aerobic system, can't catch up quite quickly. So we incur a little bit of debt. We got to pay it off. We dip into our anaerobic resources, yada, yada. EPOC is reflective of the off kinetics timeline. So this is the other side of things. So with the on kinetics, there was that biphasic response where we had the fast phase and it was followed by a slow phase, if you'll recall. So the off kinetics, to a large extent, or to a very high extent, depending on who you ask and how you measure it and how you chart it, mirrors this effect. So it happens just the same way. And yes, the exercise domains, the moderate, heavy, severe, extreme, can have some effect on it, but it's argued that it's just the same. So there's a couple points here. And one is that there's a rapid and a prolonged component. So just keep that in mind, just like the on kinetics. And then the other point is that for the sake of this discussion, off kinetics are going to be equal to EPOC. They're not the same thing, but for what we're talking about today, they might as well be.
So like, put in another way, you send the body the signal that, hey, I'm training and working hard, and your body, okay, ramps things up. That's the VO2 on kinetics, right? And then when we're talking about VO2 off kinetics, it's the body starts to get the memo of, oh, okay, not putting out that effort. I'm going to ramp things down, right?
Exactly right.
In the most basic terms.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yep. So what exactly is EPOC? Pretty simply, it's just a measure of the oxygen that we utilize in order to facilitate the exercise come down. So it's basically the other side of things. How much energy does that take? So what does this measure of oxygen consumption after exercise tell us? Because we know that during the oxygen consumption, we can measure efficiency, right? We can look at the actual oxygen cost of exercise, and we can reduce that cost by increasing efficiency, or increase efficiency by reducing that cost. When we measure it afterwards, we gain some insights of further understanding of the residual workload. So this allows us to quantify energy expenditure after the fact. And we can do this because we know that a liter of oxygen consumed is equivalent to, or it takes about 5 calories of energy. So 1 liter of O2 consumed, 5 kilocalories of energy burned. So for example, one study looked at high intensity repeats, alternating repeats, where they worked at 90% of VO2 max, recovered at 30, did it over and over again for, I can't remember the length of time, but they compared this to 36 minutes at just 60% of VO2 max steady state. And it was equal work, equal watts, same amount of calories, same amount of energy expenditure prior to post. And what happened in post is that the high intensity training yielded an increase in EPOC for 38 minutes, which equated to about 3.6 additional liters of oxygen consumed. The continuous only elevated it for about 17 minutes for about 1.9 liters of oxygen consumed. So knowing that conversion, this is an 18 versus 9.5 calorie difference between doing intervals and doing steady state work. So yet another point in favor of high intensity interval training. So the real point here is what we're trying to figure out is just how disruptive was the work performed.
Can I point out something with this really quick too? This is a great example of when you look at data, you could express that in 2 different ways and it would be very different. So like you could say the fact that it's basically one burns twice as much as another, right? But if you really look at that, the difference between 18 to 9.5 calories is likely very minimal in terms of the impact on your body, right?
Yep. Yeah, that too is a salient point. We're going to come back around to that.
On that with some studies, they're like, no, it's double, it's twice as much. But then when you look at it, it's just, it's not a meaningful amount, right? So
yeah, for sure. Not in day-to-day living, maybe in the lab. Okay, so considering these 2 phases, what takes place during the rapid phase, and they usually limit this to the first hour or so. So replenishment of oxygen stores, right? We got to resaturate hemoglobin and myoglobin, resynthesize phosphagens and glycogens, your ATP, your creatine phosphate, your stored sugar, and lactate removal, as it's sometimes termed, but more accurately, metabolism, right? We're going to utilize it aerobically. The more obvious things that are occurring, and these are the things, one of the things that Sean pointed out is increase in circulation, increase in ventilation, huffing and puffing. And along with that is an increase in body temperature. So anytime we do this, we get an increase in oxygen uptake. Increase in oxygen uptake increases oxygen cost, increases energy consumed, increases that energy expenditure. And regarding the body temperature specifically, there was a 2008 study that had athletes do a really, or maybe just sedentary folk, I don't remember, but they did a very light workload for just 60 minutes in a 30 degree chamber. So that's about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And what they noted was that only half of the heat stored was dissipated after 60 minutes of recovery, leading to showing us that the majority of the residual heat was still in the muscle. So we're still cooling after a light workload and 60 minutes of recovery. At least they were in this example. So, and I know we're talking with Hannah and Alex here. Undoubtedly, you guys have dealt with this. You don't just cross the line and everything returns to normal and you're good to go, especially on a hot day.
Yeah, Alex, you just mentioned this with your yesterday, I think you did 4 by 5 minute VO2 intervals in 100-degree heat.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't stored that 100-degree heat for the rest of the day.
I'm sure you did. You probably went to bed with it.
Yeah. Do you have that ever after races too? In this case, Hannah, I know I've felt that. Like I feel like I'm just like radiating heat post race.
Yeah, absolutely. I've felt it, obviously the hotter the race, I feel like the longer you feel it. But I mean, when you cross the finish line, of course, everyone wants to put a jacket on you because all the spectators are like, oh, it's cold. But you're still so hot for so long until you've been cooling down for an hour. And then you're like, oh, wow, it is kind of cold. But if it's been 100 degrees, I mean, there have been days where I've done my workout and been done at noon and still at 9 o'clock at night, I'm like, why is the heater on?
Yeah. It's crazy how much of that heat, and it's, I guess you kind of could say that we retain it, but really we create it, right, Chad? Mm-hmm. Like we're still generating all that heat thereafter.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask a question here? I'm curious. What role do you think adrenaline might play in this? Because surely you have an adrenaline rush, and the adrenaline doesn't just, like you're saying, it's not an off switch. It doesn't just leave your body after the race. So how much do you think adrenaline is impacting respiratory rate, all of those things.
According to what I read, a fair amount. So that leads us to that one other point to make regarding the rapid phase, which actually has to trickle into the prolonged phase and probably sticks there for, whatever length of time, I don't know, but that's the parasympathetic reactivation, or what's just as easily termed as sympathetic withdrawal. So the idea being is that we've been in a fight or flight phase, or what's the word I'm looking for? State for a period of time, and we have to reverse that. And again, just like everything else, just because we shut things off, just because we stopped working, doesn't mean that it immediately withdraws. And one of the effects, or one of the physiologic actions that goes along with this sympathetic activity is this increase in catecholamines. So norepinephrine, or epinephrine, or adrenaline, noradrenaline, depending on which side of the pond you find yourself on, has to reverse itself. That doesn't happen instantaneously. So that's a very good point. And so this is actually probably a good transition between these two phases. I'm sure there are other things that overlap. Nothing's tidy ever with biology, physiology. So let's look at what happens during the prolonged phase of EPOC. And whereas the short phase was limited to about an hour's worth of activity, the prolonged phase has a half-life that numbers in hours. And of the studies that I looked at, I found the upper limit, not for the half-life, but the total time the EPOC stayed elevated, to be at 38 hours. So there are things we can do that can affect us quite a ways after the act.
Wow.
So during, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like people are going to listen to the 18 versus 9 calories and be like, oh, sweet. When I do VO2 effort, I'm just going to burn 18 more calories. It's fine. But I wanted to be clear, like that's one piece of it, like very close after. So, yeah. So like Jonathan said, it's not a switch. You're not just like, 10 more calories will be fine. Like this, through the heat and through how long the EPOC lasts, it's going to be quite a few more calories on those.
And the longer it hangs on, there are certain undesirable aspects of this that I'm going to get to. So bear with me. So during this prolonged phase, one of the things that occurs is a shift in substrate. So we've been metabolizing largely probably carbohydrate, and depending on the intensity, of course, and now we shift from carbohydrate metabolism to fat metabolism. And in doing so, there's this increase in the rate of what's called the fatty acid triglyceride cycling. So basically, when we liberate fat stores, when we're working, we break down adipose tissue that's stored as fat stored as triglycerides, right? Kick those fatty acids into the bloodstream. Now they can be utilized by the muscle tissue. But when we shut off exercise, those fatty acids are still floating around. They've got no use, so they have to be repackaged, whether that takes place intracellularly or extracellularly. It requires energy. And this process is often credited for a significant, if not the most significant part of EPOC following prolonged steady state exercise, which makes perfect sense considering if you've been working at a low rate and your fat metabolism is probably higher than your carbohydrate metabolism, imagine working at 60, 70% versus 80 or 90%, then there's going to be pretty free flowing state, assuming you're not just jamming carbohydrate into the system, of fatty acids. Right. And this has all got to be reversed. And I'm sure to some extent this carries to higher intensity exercise. It has to. So Barr in 1990 actually went as far as to say that the energy cost of this increased TGFA cycling rate may account for as much as half of the delayed component of EPOC. So of all the other things I'm going to tell you right now that affect this prolonged phase of EPOC, this is the big hitter. And then an overarching point that I don't want to get lost in the noise here is that most of the activity we do during exercise is muscular. So most of the recovery is too. Okay. And that'll make more sense as we go if it doesn't make sense already. Okay. So what causes differences in EPOC? And I'll just point out the study that I called a lot of this from. It's Borsheim and Barr 2003, a link to the review. They looked at 60 studies, the ones that actually qualified for inclusion, but in the paper itself, there are 140 citations. So it's a pretty weighty read, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. It'll steer you a million directions.
That's very,
it's quite a lot.
Understated.
I read them all. I did not.
This is what Chad's doing on his trainer with his classical music and his unwashed boobs.
Yeah, Chad, I don't know if you know this, but you were memed by the cycling internet this morning. Actually, somebody made a meme about like, people that like listen to music on the trainer being normal, other people that like watch old races being normal, and then how terrifying people are that read when they're on the trainer.
Oh, you can do all those things. I can totally do them all at once.
Yeah, Chad does
There's no
them all
reason
at
why
once.
not. Increase that bandwidth. Come on.
Yeah, just read 140 citations while you're training. Yeah, sounds great. So, sorry, Chad, we interrupted.
So what did Borsheim and Barr tell us? He told us a number of things, but largely they told us that it all comes down to intensity. So to get just a little sciencey for a second, intensity demonstrates a curvilinear and sometimes an exponential relationship to EPOC. So what that means is that as the intensity of exercise goes up, so too does this EPOC after the fact. Okay, with curvilinear, that means at some point there's a break though, and that higher intensity is actually going to turn downward. Whereas with exponential, just goes up till that upward swing basically becomes a vertical line. The point is, higher the intensity, the greater the EPOC in most cases. And what's also interesting is the intensity affects both the magnitude, which we typically measure in liters, as I just called out a second ago, and the duration of EPOC, so how long it lasts. And a 2014 study by Mann kind of looked at, they looked at EPOC through the lens as using it as a marker for training load, for us to get a sense of how severe the disruption to homeostasis was. And it's interesting because they tried to use EPOC, the magnitude specifically of EPOC, as a measure of the internal load, such that they could model the relationship between training load and training response, which is a great idea. And I don't know that it went anywhere. The study was done 6 years ago, and I don't see a lot of devices that actually measure EPOC in order to tell us when to train more or less. But still an interesting idea. They took roughly 40 moderately trained runners and just had them run on a treadmill for 20 minutes at a time, either at 60, 70, or 80% of VO2 max. And what they noticed was that EPOC actually became slower or more prolonged every time they increased the intensity. And this totally demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. That there's a positive relationship between EPOC and intensity. And a couple of examples of this that are a little bit interesting. One study did 20 minutes of work intervals performed at 85% of VO2 max, and they saw a 3 to 7% increase in EPOC, and it lasted for about 12 to 16 hours. But then they dropped the intensity and increased the duration. So now they go 30 minutes, but they do steady state at only 70%, slight increase in EPOC, and it only lasts 3 hours. So again, It just drives home the point. And this is actually quantified in a study linked by Gore in 1990, where intensity accounts for, and he put a hard number on it, 45% of the variance in EPOC. So again, all the things I'm going to describe, most of it comes down to intensity.
And you're just talking about a 15% difference in intensity in those two examples,
surprising.
At least.
Yeah.
And
there's
even
a lot of
the lower
examples of
intensity one is longer. Crazy. Wow. I guess this kind of explains like why Twilight Criterium racing, like Tuesday Night World sort of stuff, is so brutal on sleep.
Yeah. Well, the duration's high there, the intensity's high. I mean, it's abusive. So it's a big disruption. Takes those riders well away from their homeostatic state, which the body is doing everything it can to return to.
How do you manage that, Hannah, with like fat tire crits when you do epic rides? Because those happen in the evenings.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, one of the things I was going to say is it's interesting to think about this EPOC and this duration of essentially recovery when we're looking at metrics like so many people use Whoop now, right? So you're looking at heart rate variability and you see, like maybe it's just overnight, maybe it's a couple days, like he said, 36 hours in one instance. So yeah, that just struck me a little bit. But I think like those fat tire crits, it's tough. It's pretty funny when you talk to, your fellow athletes after it. It's like, oh, how did you sleep last night? Alex, I'm sure you can relate to that. And everyone's like, oh, I slept about how you'd expect. And I think a lot of the time I hear people blame it on the caffeine because, you caffeinate up so much, at least a lot of people do before those. And I'm sure that plays a role, but I think a lot of it is also exactly what we're talking about here, that we don't give enough credit to that for sure.
Yeah, and the adrenaline piece too, right? Like, I mean, especially for those Tuesday night crits, the adrenaline of hometown glory, nothing beats that. So I don't know. I feel like it always reminds me of the Missoula XC too. That was at like 6 or 7 p.m. And it was just like, I wouldn't fall asleep till like 2 a.m. I would be laying in bed for hours after that. It's just, It's a combination of everything, right? Like sleeping when you're hot is hard, and then you're all worked up, and then you're thinking about the race. And I'm sure caffeine plays a role as well. And I know some athletes who, like for fat tire crits, won't use caffeine because they think the sleep is more important. So there's a lot of different approaches, but I don't think there's any getting around the EPOC and the adrenaline and just being an athlete and like that high you ride for racing.
I think of USA Crits racers too. A lot of them have back-to-back weekends of racing or stage races for all of us average Joes and Janes listening in, that we do a stage race. If we're talking about EPOC that could last, for upwards of, in one case, up to 36 hours, that could mean that you are carrying in this, you are entering your next event still very much elevated in this state.
Yeah,
and
I
it
think
could
the implications on stage
just never
racing.
leave it. Yeah, you just stay within it for the duration of the stage race. It's tough. Yeah. Interesting to think about the actual contextual implications of this for us.
Yeah, and very related to that is the duration over which these things occur. So there is a relation with duration too. So whereas that was a curvilinear or exponential relation, the relation with duration to EPOC is more linear. But it still bears up. So as you drag it out, it continues to increase, but it only influences the duration of EPOC rather than the magnitude. So it doesn't bump it up a heck of a lot. It just drags it out longer, and it only seems to take place when you're above 50% of VO2 max. So you have to be doing a certain level of work. So if you, for instance, are doing something that you hope will wind you down at the end of the evening, and you keep it at 40%. Chances are very minimized that you're actually going to impact your sleeping, impact your recovery process. It just kind of talks to the efficacy of true recovery rides. Get on the bike and recover at 60%. Well, you may not get the impact that you're actually looking for. And then it's a good time to note that the biggest EPOC values are actually derived when both the intensity and the duration are substantial. And again, I mean, Hannah and Alex, both of you guys, you're not out there for an hour at a time with a lot of your events. And now Alex, being not Mr. 4 hours, out there for a heck of a long time. And I guarantee the intensity is high that whole time. So the come down is going to be pretty protracted. Okay. So what else can affect EPOC? And these are minor players, but players nonetheless. It does mostly come down to intensity with a secondary role of duration, and then the combination of intensity and duration, I think, are pretty much third in line. But the modality. So there was a 2015 study by Sousa that just looked at differences between rowers and runners and cyclists and swimmers. And there were subtle differences where they were present, but I don't think anything worth really bringing up here. I don't think anything is going to tweak anyone's training to a point that it's worth mentioning. Training status. And this is super equivocal. I looked at 4 studies, and they suggested that EPOC may be smaller, larger, or not different between trained and untrained individuals. I mean, that about covers it. That's everything. So they told me virtually nothing, but there was some information that led me to believe that VO2, with regards to VO2 max, that the higher it is, that the shorter the rapid phase is. And this makes perfect sense. If you have a high VO2 max and you have fast on kinetics and they mirror each other, you're going to have fast off kinetics. That makes sense. But greater prolonged EPOC. And the catch is some studies only looked at it up to 15 minutes and said, no, there's no difference in the prolonged phase of EPOC. But if they dragged it out to longer than 15 minutes, they noticed, oh, no, there's still quite a lot going on. So once they started looking at longer recovery durations, they recognized that even with really high VO2 max, the prolonged phase of EPOC was still very much elevated in these high level athletes. So, and just to explain that a different way, think about why. If you have higher fitness, excuse me, you have higher or faster kinetics. But also, the greater the intensities and durations that elite athletes throw at their bodies, the greater the disruption in their recovery, the longer the recovery trajectory.
This is like another
kind of balances out.
This kind of goes back to the whole discussion of minimal effective dose in one respect, Chad. It's going to kind of tie into a question we're going to cover later about making your training, keeping the work the same, but making it unnecessarily hard, perhaps, and expecting to get more of it. If this ends up extending and increasing the EPOC that you experienced after your training, then it's flying in the face possibly of the adaptations you hope to gain, right?
No, that's a really interesting angle, and one I'll touch on for sure, but something I'd like to really explore. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I was just
Okay,
thinking
so
about this. If they're measuring elevated epoch for 36 hours, does this mean some poor human had to wear a gas exchange mask for 36 hours?
No, typically they measure, like they'll measure at, in fact, we're coming up on one of these studies at particular time periods. So, you know,
Okay.
they'll measure it a certain amount of numbers prior, then a certain amount of numbers prior, just prior,
Gotcha.
a few hours
So
after,
just like
several
dodge
hours.
along. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just draw a curve.
Because I'm not dropping out of epoch if I have a mask on. I'm panicked
That's
anyway.
Random thoughts by Alex.
Yeah.
No, it's a fair question.
Yeah.
Okay, so other possible influences on epoch. One was gender, but it seemed like anytime that they said that women had lower epoch than men, it was because they were throwing a lower relative workload at them. When they actually normalized to size and muscle mass, everything seemed to kind of balance out. Muscle composition was one. So whether fat-free mass or lean mass, and there's a pretty fine difference between these two things. I'm not even going to bother explaining it because it hurts my brain. There's a 2008 study by Tahara, and they pointed out a positive correlation between fat-free mass and epoch. So, you know, get swole, be a big person with big bones, all those things, greater epoch. Interestingly, with lean mass, there was one study that pointed out that non-exercise muscles may contribute to epoch due to perfusion with blood high in lactate. So, you know, you shut everything off, but there's still lactate coursing through the system. That bloodstream doesn't delineate. It's still bathing underutilized or unutilized muscles with lactate laden blood. And that lactate has to be metabolized aerobically. So boom, oxygen cost goes up.
So that could be kind of like a vote for why we do cool downs after something.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep. To facilitate the processing of lactate. Yeah, that's a valid argument. And I'm pretty sure there are studies out there. And then the less obvious endurance muscles. So you think of the postural muscles and breathing muscles. And we were talking to Hannah yesterday, and she brought up this very thing, which ties in super nicely.
Yeah, it's super interesting because everyone thinks about, you know, their quads, their glutes, all these like huge muscles that are working, but just breathing, you know, takes muscles that we don't think about it because breathing's so natural. But, you know, our diaphragm's working, our intercostals are working. And for me, something I noticed post Leadville was my scalenes. And the scalenes are muscles found in the neck, and they help with deep inspiration. They help to rise the first and second rib. And so after Leadville, which, you know, it's at 10,000 feet, it's, you know, 7 to 8 hour race for me. And I'm breathing hard the whole time. And the next day, taking a deep breath, I could feel the muscles in my neck just straining. So I could feel the soreness in those scalenes, which to me was just so strange because you expect to wake up and have your legs be sore. But it just really struck me because I thought, well, yeah, I guess, you know, how many huge deep breaths did I take across that 8 hour period? Yeah, a lot. And so, yeah, just acknowledging those muscles and realizing how hard they work for us is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, completely. So muscles that you wouldn't even have thought of are still in the throes of recovery, you know, 24 hours later, still elevating that oxygen consumption post exercise.
When we were driving after Leadville, a similar situation. I was driving actually with your fiance Chad back down from Leadville, I think 2 or 3 hours after the race. And I remember suddenly becoming aware of my breathing, and I was just doing the most shallow, short, small breaths. And I was like, this isn't normal. Like I should actually be breathing normally. And I suddenly realized that the typically subconscious operation of my diaphragm, I had to consciously control it because it was so fatigued. Because when you're breathing up there, it's just tough to get anything, especially when you're at that level of activity for that long. So I was, consciously thinking like, okay, draw down your chest cavity, like I was like trying to actually make that muscle work because it got so fatigued. It's super interesting, especially in the breathing process, because it's typically autonomous, it feels like, at least it feels like it just takes care of itself. But even fatigue can happen at that level.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's not cardiac tissue. I mean, it deals with fatigue just like anything else. Well, not just like anything else, but to some degree.
Yeah. Super interesting. What's next, Chad?
Okay, so one other thing that bears mentioning in terms of what affects EPOC is strength training. And it's worth bringing it up because it's just another vote. Well, I would say it's a vote in favor of strength training, but considering the lesson that I'm going to share with you at the end of this, maybe not. But either way, strength training has a big impact on EPOC. So one study from 2002 looked at EPOC and they started well out, which I really like because they established a pretty firm baseline. They looked at their athletes 34 hours removed from exercise prior to, mind you, and then steps along the way, all the way to 48 hours post. And what's interesting about that is two things: that they, really leaned into that whole baseline measure. And secondly, is that the previous to this study, they hadn't looked at EPOC in strength training past 16 hours. So, whether it took place past 16 hours, nobody knew. These guys extended it to 48. And these were the ones that found out that VO2 could be significantly elevated above baseline 38 hours post. And all they had them do was bench press, power cleans, and squats. And the workout totaled 31 minutes. And again, big impact. I don't even know if this one was done in a circuit manner. It might have been with full recovery. I'm sorry, I didn't note that, but it is also worth noting that intensity is still a really important factor when it comes to strength training. If for whatever reason you're trying to elevate EPOC, and there are reasons for that, by the way, fat loss heading the charge. So circuit training in this case would be king. So instead of taking 3 or 4 minutes before you hit another set and chatting with your buddy or doing whatever people do when they waste time in the gym, actually, move on to the next exercise. Only get 20 or 30 seconds of rest. Keep that oxygen elevated, because if your oxygen consumption is elevated, well, even with strength training, you're pushing up, obviously, the aerobic stress, but also the eventual excess post-exercise oxygen consumption.
Interesting.
Okay. There are no comments. I'm going to move on to what all this translates to. Okay, so what does this all mean? Why is this pertinent outside of the questions asked? First off, small increments in our weekly caloric burn come largely from fat. And when we consider that weight gain is often due to a really slight, well, sometimes more, but often slight caloric surplus, but over an extended period of time, this could be seen as a method for weight regulation. If we basically increase, unbeknownst to us, our caloric intake more than our output, and we're gradually adding weight, well, this could be the slight difference that allows us to gradually take off weight and basically regulate our weight. So another point, and this was pointed out to me in a 2006 study by LaForgia, is that EPOC, and this is news to nobody, but it's not, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. This one is, it will not impact energy balance. Point being, we don't need to increase our energy intake knowing that post-exercise, we're going to need more calories. They'll come from somewhere.
Yeah. Is this because of like fat metabolism, most likely, and the fact that we have plenty of stores on board for
exactly.
that?
And if you're nourishing appropriately, there's probably adequate nutrition on board anyway, but yes, largely due to fat metabolism, I would guess. This study also noted, and this is a little bit unrelated, but the cumulative effect of training for 3 times a week over the course of a year could have the energy expenditure equivalent to the energy stored in 1.5 kilograms of body fat, or 3.3 pounds. So this small little uptick, which doesn't seem like a lot, and it's actually not, over time can have a pretty substantial impact per year. If we're talking about not adding 3.3 pounds of body fat to our frames, that's a big deal. Another translation is, we've already touched on this, faster off kinetics, just like the on kinetics translate to quicker recovery. And this means, higher recoverability is the fun term that's often thrown at this, but it's just better repeatability. And I assure you that both Hannah and Alex can relate to this. I mean, you tell me, how important is it to be able to repeat hard efforts within the context of a race?
Yeah.
And how much does that change with training?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the most desired things, right? Like, I feel like for the general cyclist, there's like that chart, like, oh, I can hit X watts per kilo for a certain amount of time, but it's like, it's the athlete that can repeat that at then like 98%, 96%, 96%. Like, I feel like you see it on the last lap of XCO races quite a lot. It looks like someone's getting dropped, but it's really, I think of it kind of like Usain Bolt always said he was the best at sprinting because he decelerated the least. It's kind of like that, but drawn over 90 minutes. It's the person who can just keep hitting close to that mark.
Exactly. How defining a factor is that when you're shaping the podium? Because I mean, I think Nino Schurter and Flukinger. I mean, these guys just can hit and hit and hit again. And they talk about it. It always cracks me up when they talk about they're just testing the field. They're testing the field when it doesn't work. But if it would have worked, they would have went away and they would have stayed away. But the fact is, they can throw out those attacks because they know they have those capabilities. They can reel it back in and do it again, reel it back in and do it again.
Yeah. And I would add, even from a training standpoint, you can only train as hard as you can recover. And so if you're thinking, I mean, you can think about that day after day, but you can think about that even one interval to the next. If you can only handle 4 3-minute intervals, well, that's your limitation. What if you could do 10 of them? How much stronger are you going to be able to train? How much stronger are you going to race? And then how, are you going to be able to battle Nino in the last lap all of a sudden?
Exactly. And that's perfectly on the nose, because the next point I wanted to make is that the irony of this all is that it's really in our best interest, especially as elites, to minimize epoch. You want faster recovery. You want it in the moment. You want to be able to hit again and again and again. You want it between workouts, between races, between training cycles. I mean, it's not desirable to have a protracted epoch. Exactly. Not in terms of being able to recover and go again. You want to return to baseline. You want to reestablish homeostasis such that you can tax the system again, adjust to it, and repeat the cycle.
Yeah, that's the, once again, don't seek to make training harder. Seek to make training more frequent and more sustainable. Consistency, really. If you can hit your marks and consistently progress, then you're going to be better off. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing, right? And in theory, it's changing what that homeostasis is, right? With FTP and everything like that. It's like what was a 8 out of 10 before becomes a 6 out of 10, and the epoch responds that same way. So in a race, you're being able to hit higher numbers for a lower epoch than those lower numbers were costing you. So it's, I mean, in a way, you're training, I guess, the epoch system to to make your body more efficient at doing those efforts and doing them consistently.
Yeah. So Chad, any other notes to add on epoch?
Yeah. So let me close out just with some additional considerations that didn't really fit anywhere within the discussion so far. First off, I came across a frequent mention of a high inter-individual variability. So subjectivity, right? In response to the same relative stimulus. This is arguable, though, because I didn't find a single study, and I'm not sure there's one out there still, that follow the same athlete through. I mean, they didn't subject them to the same training stimulus over and over and see if maybe there was an intra-athlete variability. So cross athletes for sure, but what if that happens anyways, even within the same athlete? Another is that, do keep in mind, and this is news to no one, this is where I jumped ahead, is that most of the benefits of exercise is during the workout. Okay. Yes, we understand this. And LeChamanon in 2006 actually quantified how the energy expenditure of epoch relates to the workout itself. And it's about a 5 to 10% bump. So for example, if you did an 800 kcal workout, you can look at 40 to 80 additional calories utilized via oxygen consumption and all these processes that are going on post-workout. My point here is that sprint intensity training may actually yield a higher epoch, but the workout itself and the total energy expenditure is still going to be relatively low. So don't do a bunch of sprint workouts with the intention of lifting epoch at the expense of what could be a quality workout. But with that said, when we look at this through the lens of weight and fat loss implications, epoch becomes something different. It's now the exercise after effect in the caloric expenditure that takes place when you're not doing anything because you did everything right prior to. So the inclusion of some of those high intensity or sprint efforts that I just talked about within a steady state workout goes a long ways towards elevating epoch. So if you're trying to boost epoch, burn a little more fat post, well, that's one way to do it. Another weight or fat loss consideration is that recovery intervals actually contribute to total epoch too. So when you're doing a 3x20 and you have 5-minute recoveries, there's a little bit of excess oxygen being used during that recovery valley that you're not getting credited for. So just yet another benefit of recovery valleys. And then anything that boosts epoch is going to boost your lipolytic or fat burning capabilities. So again, from this perspective, this is a good thing. Maybe chasing epoch actually makes sense. And it's I should mention that though 50% suffices, and that's where the studies set the floor, that if you can work over 70% of your VO2 max, so we're talking in the ballpark of 90% of threshold when you're on a bike, this is what optimizes that post-exercise energy expenditure. So do a little more work if you're looking to maximize EPOC.
So taking this full circle and bringing it back, the possible reasons that Pogacar's elevated breathing was continuing on the podium, the many things that Sean said, VO2 down kinetics, aerobic system still running to process byproducts of an anaerobic effort, recovery of repairing damage that was done, and then residual stress hormone, or like we're talking about adrenaline in the body. You got a blackout there, Sean. You nailed it. The bingo card's full. So that's absolutely the case. More fit athletes will expect to have a quicker ramp down than others, but also this is just something that everybody faces in one way or another. Is that an accurate, I guess, sum up of that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thanks for the help with synopsis. Brain doesn't work today. So, and then looking back at that, the energy cost, it's not a substantial energy cost. It's not like you're doing, 2x whatever you did when you were training, but just the same, it's also not nothing. And it's something to consider because of the stress that it can add to your body too,
For sure. It's very not nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very not nothing.
Yeah, no, and
English teachers
super poorly stated, but my point is it does add up to something. So credit where credit's due. It does have an impact. It just takes place over time. It's not something that at the end of every workout, you're like, oh, wow, I really maximized my EPOC there. That was a good day. No, it's just something that at the end of the year, when you don't have 3 extra pounds of belly fat, maybe you can credit EPOC.
Yeah, that I bet all of us that are listening to this have probably recognized the fact that the body composition changes that you generally have when you're consistently training versus when you are not consistently training. And a lot of this makes sense. It's not like you do a quote fat burner workout, or you do those fat burner workouts, in quick succession or something like that, or with high frequency. It's just the carrying on of consistent training shifts your body. This is one of the ways that it happens. So yeah, super interesting. Any other thoughts on this EPOC stuff from anybody before we go into the rapid fire questions? Cool. We have an extremely important one to start with. For those that watched Beers with Chad, they'll know that this one has an inside joke to it. But just the same, which character from Sesame Street would win in a criterium?
Big Bird.
I think, yeah, that was my knee-jerk reaction. But on a flat course, for sure. But on a hilly course, he's a pretty big guy.
Yeah.
Big Bird all day. That's
Why
like
Big Bird?
1,000 watts endurance case.
It's true.
He's big. He's not very aero though. The feathers may help with being aero,
He's got
but
big
I'm not sure.
big levers, and so does Snuffleupagus. So those big drivers.
I thought everyone was going to say what I was going to say, but now I feel like I'm going with the Cookie Monster because he's really well fueled.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's what Amaret said this morning, because he brings great enthusiasm to the game.
Exactly.
You'd have to get him out of the trash can first, though. I mean,
yeah. Good
holes
point.
in it so you
No,
can
that's
ride it
Grover. No, wait, who are we talking about?
Cookie Monster.
Who's in the?
Isn't Oscar,
That's
right?
Oscar the Grouch.
Yeah.
Oscar.
Oscar.
He wouldn't do well. He's way too grumpy. He wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. I had 3 thoughts on this. I thought Big Bird would be the lead out man that I would want for sure. All right. Big old pocket of air, huge watts. He'd probably be able to hold for a while. But then I honestly, it's strange as it sounds, Rizzo would be like a little Caleb Ewan. He's got crazy energy, Rizzo. And he's able to just carry on. If you give him Big Bird in front of him, he might actually be pretty lethal. So he'd be pretty good. But I also thought of this, and I thought of Beaker, and I thought that at times Nate is Beaker to me in a crit race. He's like the almost like robotic scientific thing,
I think Beaker's a Muppet, though.
Oh,
pretty sure Beaker's a Muppet. Yeah.
I'm
Leave it to
confusing
Jonathan to give 3 answers to a rapid fire question.
Hey,
way to dig deep into the character catalog.
If there's one skill that I have, it's overthinking. It's well developed. Next one from Barrow says, if you could only listen to one song while you train forevermore, what would it be?
I'll go first because I had to think of this for about a half a second. There's a song by the Black Foxes with 2 X's called Badlands. It's 8.5 minutes long. it's like the perfect blend between a Tool Journey and a Black Angel song. It doesn't abide any particular traditional song structure. I think you get like 5 verses before you even hit the pre-chorus. And then the chorus, every time I hear it, and it's got to be 4 or 5 times throughout the song, I can't hold myself back. It's ridiculously motivating and
700 watts.
and passionate. Seriously, every time. And then the bridge is basically him reciting a poem behind almost a wall of noise. And it's, I've probably listened to the song 100 times. It's an 8.5 minute song, and I cannot hear it enough times.
8.5 is useful. You could listen to it across almost every sort of workout.
I've cycled it for an entire hour-long workout before, and it did the job.
Yeah. How about you, Hannah? What song would you have?
I think I'm going to cheat on this one and say if I had to listen to only one song, I would pick no songs, because I think I could get really used to my own thoughts, but one song would drive me crazy. Like if you're doing an interval and you don't have music, you can get in that zone. Like maybe you get in a flow or you're just thinking about something. But if the wrong song comes on during an interval, forget about it. Like you have to pause the song. It's just not an option to push through it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is why Hannah's one of the fastest. She can do intervals without music.
Yeah. How about you, Alex? What would you pick?
I cannot do intervals without music. I'll pick the latest one to pop up on my Discover Weekly, The Den by Joel Fletcher. And I'll let everybody look that one up because it's not a popular song. It's just the way my music works is I have a Spotify My Discover Weekly, and anything on that I really like, I heart that. And then it goes to my liked songs. And then I use that for key days. So it's all hitter songs. So there are no bad songs on interval days.
Nice. I agree with Hannah that it would be an absolute terrible curse to experience to only have one song to listen to forever. That would be really rough, but just the same, it'd probably be one of 2 songs. Sleep Now in the Fire by Rage Against the Machine is awesome for training for me. That one's great. There's another one too, by Pendulum, and it's called Self versus Self. That one's pretty good too. So those 2 would be ones that I would listen to. They're I guess metal songs, but those would be them. If you're listening right now, chances are you have fantastic suggestions. So if you're listening to the podcast, go to the forum and let us know your songs. And then we should put together a playlist on the forum of these, like the one songs that everybody wants to listen to. We'll put down our 4 and then we'll add to it, and everybody will be able to find it on Spotify.
We got to make it a public playlist, and you can go find it.
Yeah.
That'd be fun to listen to everybody's number one song, because go all over the place.
Yeah. Please, somebody don't put in something like Marvin Gaye or something. Just no trolling us. Here. Yeah.
No Sesame Street theme song.
Yeah. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can put it down in the comments below, and we'll continually add to that. So that'll be a fun one to maintain. Okay. Next one from Nick says, where's the safest place to keep my keys while out on a ride, particularly on mountain bike rides where crashes or jostling could theoretically make me lose my keys? I have a persistent fear I will get back to my car. My keys will be out on the trail somewhere. I think you and all of us, Nick, share that fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's terrifying. Yeah.
Anything with a zipper or a closure. I mean, some jerseys have a little zipper in the back. You can stick it in your saddlebag if you have one, swap box if you have one of those. Anything that closes would make me feel better about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just want to take a moment to validate this fear because it's really real. Last year, so my fiance, he races enduro. He's a great rider. So when we do descents, he's down the trail. And last year I'm riding down and started to notice blood on the trail. I'm like, oh, great.
Oh,
right.
God.
So I come to the bottom and he just has this huge cut where I'm like, this is for sure stitches. Like, we need to get back to the car. And luckily he thought, oh, I need to make sure I have the keys first. And he didn't. So he's pouring blood out of his arm, and I'm searching all over the trail for the keys. So don't do that. And I agree, put it somewhere with a zipper.
At least he left you blood crumbs to go find it.
Gross.
If I can offer a pro tip, Zippered and closed, yes, for sure. But you got to make sure you close that zipper. So you can't just leave the zipper dangling open, because we lost our keys on a ski hill, which meant sleeping in our ski clothes for an evening, trying to figure out how we were going to get from Mammoth back to Reno. It was a whole thing. Fortunately, somebody eventually, in like the 11th hour, found them for us. But I specifically put it in the zippered pocket, just didn't zip that pocket.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Another pro tip is ride from home. And then you don't need car keys.
Yeah. I know a lot of people also do like hide a key boxes too with their cars. That's a little tough with more modern cars, since they have like the fobs that would activate if you're there. So they make little hide a keys that are like Faraday boxes that you can put it in. I also see like a lot of people just hide their keys in different spots that aren't a hide a key box. And it always seems a bit risky to me. But then again, you know, I don't know. I guess depending on the area you live and everything else, that probably changes. I like the car I have. I just use a key, or sorry, not a key, but a credit card. Basically, my card just opens my car, or my phone opens my car, instead of having to worry about keys. And that has been the hugest upgrade, because that just like existing subconscious fear during every single ride that I've carried, now that it's gone, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm light. It feels so good to not have it anymore.
Tell me you own a Tesla without telling me you own a Tesla.
Yes. Yeah. It just changes everything substantially. So it's pretty cool. Okay. Next one. Where would your dream training camp be? And we can't go into too much detail on this. We can just go into the location, because we're going to go into detail on training camps after this. But where would your dream training camp be?
Somewhere warm with a beach that I haven't been before. New routes.
Yeah, I feel like I could list a lot of places that I've been that are really fantastic. Like anywhere in California, I feel like is pretty darn great. But I think for the fun of it, I'm going to say the Canary Islands, because it seems like all the Euros go there for training camp, and I've never been. So that's a dream for sure.
Orange Seal training camp 2021.
Yeah, you're a team. You can make it happen. Yeah. Chad, let's say you.
Spain for sure. So it'd either be Mallorca, which would be a little more exotic, or Girona, because Pete's told me many stories and it just sounds perfect.
Yeah, I have two. Girona would be one. The beach isn't a necessary component for me. It's call me a wuss, but I like to recover in air conditioning with my legs up on a soft bed rather than a hot beach. So that Girona would be one. I'd like to go there, but I think that my actual dream spot would be Austria. It's just like Austria is stunning, or Switzerland, one of those two. You have incredible roads. You have drivers also that, like, for all of you over there, that it is like a parallel universe when you're riding on the road and cars are kind to you and they give you space and they even cheer for you when they pass you. Like, that's amazing. And it's just
Andiamo.
Yeah, it's just stunningly beautiful there. And for me, that motivates me a lot. Just being able to, like, being in a beautiful place really, really helps. I'm not sure if it's just because of like proximity to California and being there. It's incredible for training camps, but the coastal views and stuff, it doesn't quite inspire as much. I love the mountains. So yeah, it'd be awesome.
Cottage at the base.
Oh, twist my arm. Yeah. Woo. Yeah, that's perfect. That's the dream. Catch me in Austria retired someday. So, okay. Rose says, if I don't lube my chain on a smart trainer and perform a calibration with this lubeless chain, will my pedaling still be less efficient? AKA I'll have to work harder to reach the power target, or will the inefficiency from this dry and noisy chain already be taken into account? Alex, what say you? This seems like something right down your alley.
I was going to just take a moment to plug my favorite TrainerRoad feature, which is, I think it's Power Match, right?
Yes.
So I use a cork, so the chain isn't part of the equation for calculating power, and it tells the smart trainer the power from my power meter and then calibrates based on that. So in that case, it doesn't matter how gross your chain is.
Yeah, you don't ever have to lube it just because of Power Match. Yeah. I mean, if you calibrate with it, you're still dealing with, you're not going to be taking into account the chain because it's a spin down calibration, right? So if the free hub body on the trainer is really like bad and needs to be serviced, then that will affect your spin down calibration, but the chain itself won't affect the spin down calibration. So But in
Pro
terms
tip,
of the power
run
that
a-
you're putting in, it will be lost in between your legs and the power measurement device, right? And
Yep.
so your chain is in between that. Yeah. What were you
I
gonna
was
say?
gonna
Alex?
say run a wax chain on the trainer has been my little cheat, because the dirty look I'd get from Jen if I tried to bring a rag and a bottle of lube into the house to lube my chain inside would be, I'd be dead. So yeah, I
Yeah.
use one of the ice friction chains on the trainer and it's been solid. You don't have to ever change it.
How'd the wax hold up on your cassette and chainring at Leadville? You went next level with that. You didn't just wax your chain, you waxed the cassette and chainring too. Did it hold up?
Actually, yeah, it held up super well. Yeah, I was super impressed with it. I mean, it's one of those things that it's harder to measure than the chain because there's not as much flex, but as a system, it makes logical sense. And ice friction has said it's a couple watts for each. And part of the process in any wax chain is to like completely degrease and clean the surface of the chainring, cassette, and pulley wheels. So the nice thing about that is it takes 2 out of the 3 out of the equation. You're running an already waxed and cleaned cassette and chainring. So you just have to worry about the pulley wheels. So it just makes the entire system work better. It actually engages, like it allows the chain to have maximal gains.
Interesting. Did it affect how the cassette like threaded onto the hub at all? Was that did you have to like clear off the wax with those SRAM?
No,
ones?
they put like when they're waxing it, like a little, I guess, like as if you were painting something, right? They put a plug on the inside of the cassette so that they just waxed the outside.
Okay, cool.
So threads weren't affected. And then the chainring is actually like they tape it. So it's just like the teeth.
Hey, Jax, that's Alex's dog. Or
that.
maybe the other, maybe the other one. They're twins.
I can't tell them apart.
Yeah. Okay. This next one sounds miserable for all of us. Would you rather Everest at 10,000 feet or double century in a Florida summer?
I have a critical question with this. What is the temperature at 10,000 feet?
Oh yeah. Good point.
Whatever you want it to be. And then in Florida, it's over 100.
Ugh.
Then the Everesting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's cold at 10,000 feet and you have to Everest in the cold, no way.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, it'd be miserable. Right?
I'd
What would you
rather
pick,
climb
Chad?
any a day of the week. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Chad.
same. Yeah, climbing's just way more interesting than dying a slow death in the high humidity.
The big thing that I'm thinking of too, depending on the roads in Florida, like getting run off the roads by like big trucks or something like that, whereas 10,000 feet, a lot of the time you're up against like fewer people. And then you also, in most cases, when you're really high up on a mountain pass and you're on a bike, something like that, people just go, instead of thinking like, oh, a cyclist, I don't have to move over. They're like, this person's crazy. I'm going to give them lots of space. So
I want to mess with this one.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to mess with this one. If they're riding the bike up here, they're weird.
If anybody at home doesn't know where Florida is or what it's like, just take your fans inside and replace them with hair dryers and ride there for 10 hours.
And turn your shower on
what
max.
it's like. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is what double century in Florida is like.
It'd be rough. Okay. Next one says you have to cut your ride short. What do you do with a leftover bottle of mix? I do this almost every single ride because I bring an extra bottle of I always have an extra bottle just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you do, Chad?
I just leave it on the bike. I mean, it'll be there next time, right?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
With a shimmy.
Just all sticky and gross.
I do usually leave it on the bike, but then I go out and realize, oh man, I got to throw that away. So I typically forget it, unfortunately. Very wasteful.
I have a rollover system. I bring the bottle back to the fridge and then I use it the next day. And then I usually end up having another bottle ready. And then the same thing happens to that bottle. So I have like 2-day bottles, but they're almost always in the fridge, except for during the work. I'm a nerd. Yeah.
No, that's, I can relate to that. I think I have 3 frozen bottles in my freezer right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But what's your time cutoff? That's what I was trying to think of is I will reuse it, but there's definitely a time in which even in the fridge, it's done.
Yeah.
Leftovers are spooky.
Yeah, they are. I just use sugar in mine and salt. So just glucose, fructose, salt. That's it. So it's not like I don't know if y'all remember Cytomax back in the day, but if you looked at that stuff wrong, it went sour. It was like incredible, and it would smell so bad, and you just had to throw everything
I still have
away.
some in my freezer.
Oh, gross. You still have Cytomax bottles in there. But yeah, it doesn't seem to go bad as fast, but if it's beyond 2 days, even if it's in the fridge, I get rid of it. I just feel uncomfortable with it otherwise, even though it's probably not justified. I don't know, but this is a painful point on this. I went to Park City over the weekend with the intent of racing Park City point to point, but the air quality index was above 100 in the morning. And the way that I view air quality index, we did a full, like, a deep-ish dive, a Jonathan deep dive on this on an episode that you weren't on, Chad. But if it says it's 100, then I'm probably going to ride through pockets of when it's 50 and pockets of when it's 120. It's not as uniform as we all think in terms of how smoke is dispersed throughout, especially a 76-mile mountain bike ride around Park City and a bunch of valleys and peaks and everything else. So because of that, I decided to not race. And instead, I found a pocket of good air up at the very top of the mountains. And I just did 3x20 instead. So I drove all the way to Park City just to do 3x20, which is terrible. But just the same, I had 2 Camelback reservoirs, or 2 of the U-Sweepack reservoirs. I had those filled. And then I had 6 bottles as well that were all filled with mix and everything else. And I didn't put them in the trunk of my car. Instead, I put them in the frunk of the car, and they got hot on the way back. And I had to pour all of that out. Even just mixing that took like an hour. Like, so much work.
Tesla challenges.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say. This is just like an episode of Jonathan has a Tesla. Let's find out how.
No, I can't believe that
what the heck is a frunk?
I wasted. I'm bummed that I wasted that much mix. It hurts. Like, it's expensive, and then it's expensive in terms of time. Mixing all that is a pain. So
I feel like I'm somewhere between you and Chad, John. If I remembered, I'd put it in the fridge, but I bring extra calories in the forms of like solids or some gels just for that reason, because 9 times out of 10 I won't use the extras, so those are easier to stick back in the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah I do want to have like a mini fridge out by my bike for this very purpose, so then I don't fill up my normal refrigerator with like sticky bottles. My wife would probably appreciate that. Okay, next one from Liam. When is the Jonathan versus Alex Wild XC battle going to happen? And to clarify, that's me on an e-bike versus Alex not on an e-bike.
Anytime, any place, Jonathan.
Alex is ready to throw down. Which e-bike do I get? That's what really matters here. Do I get a Levo or a Levo SL? Because the Levo SL is not as powerful.
It depends if you want it to be a race.
Look at this guy.
I feel like the Levo, you just straight up drop me.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I would think so.
The Levo SL would be more fun. And I feel like we got to choose a course where you have to choose battery wisely, like not just turbo till it's dead. Like, this is the set course and you have to choose when you're in turbo and not.
This seems like a fun thing. Can somebody help us lay out the parameters for this in the forum or in the chat comments? So then Alex and I can do this post Cape
this
Epic.
Should definitely happen.
Yeah. This could be fun. Levo SL, I think, is the one to use. So I'm going to have to find an e-bike first. Okay. This next one is for Hannah specifically. What's your best advice for a female high schooler in pursuit of a college mountain bike scholarship?
There's several aspects here, but I think the biggest, like the first thing that comes to mind is race NICA. And, obviously if you're already super into mountain biking and you're racing some of the UCI junior series, that's great too. But I know a lot of high schoolers don't necessarily have access to that. And I've had a lot of young female mountain bikers come to me asking, do I have to race those? Because that's hard, like your parents have to be very involved and get you there. And if you can, it's great, but I don't think it's essential. I think NICA is really a key place that colleges are looking right now. And so racing NICA, because obviously you need to demonstrate some sort of desire to race. But then beyond that, I think it can be, there's only one winner, right, in NICA. So if you're not, or in any race, so if you're not winning NICA, it's still not a place to stress. Just showing up, doing the races is the most important thing. And then after that, sell what you're good at. And I think that that's something that especially young females can struggle with. And so, you don't need to just sit around and wait for a college to come to you. You can reach out to them, and most all of them will be super excited because most colleges want female cyclists. They don't grow on trees. Sometimes they can be really rare, especially mountain bikers. And so reach out to a variety of colleges. There's a lot of, there's a surprising amount of different ones, and sell what you're good at. And that doesn't have to be, I believe that I can win X, Y, and Z. It can be, look at the trajectory. I raced freshman, and then I raced JV, and my junior year I was racing varsity, and then my senior year I finally broke the top 10, and I've just been increasing my whole time. And by the time I'm a senior, if this increase continues, look where I'll be. That can be really exciting, especially to a coach, because they can think, oh wow, I could be a part of this journey. Sell leadership, sell that you want to be on the group ride, sell that you want to do more than one discipline, sell that you're a huge encouraging factor, all of these things. It might not be the thing that gets you a scholarship, but it could be one of many things that make you stand out and make that coach and that college think, gosh, we really want her because she's going to elevate everyone on the team. And so really think through those things, and don't be afraid to say them out loud and really sell yourself, because if you don't, who will? So that's the moment to let it all shine. And just because you sell yourself doesn't mean you're not humble. You can do it humbly and with a smile, and I think just showing passion goes a really, really long way. So go for it.
Fantastic tips.
Yeah.
Really good advice.
I can't stress the trajectory piece enough. Just personal tidbit. My best result in varsity in NICO was 14th. So it's really easy to get wrapped up in results, but cycling is an interesting sport where more time, more dedication, and just a long period of time, you can see a lot of changes. So just because, like Hannah said, you're not winning, it doesn't mean that you can't provide value or be a good cyclist. If you love it, pursue it.
Yeah. I also love that thought about don't be afraid to acknowledge what you're good at. If you're like, I'm a really good descender, or I'm really good at short, hard efforts, I'm really good at long stuff, like sell that. And we should all be proud of those individual strengths that we have. If that's your ability to read a race really well, who knows, whatever, or elevate the team's morale, like you said as well, Hannah, like own those things. Those are all really valuable. That's cool. Great advice. I feel like that should, I bet people listening to this are like, I really want to talk to Hannah about pursuing sponsorship or pursuing scholarships after that. That was good. This next one actually was a rapid fire submission, but I feel like it generates just a bit more conversation. Then we're going to get into the listener questions that you've submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. And if you're listening, go there and submit whatever questions you have. This one says, how should I adjust my plan for heavy life stress like tax season when I can't go deep? Alex, right now you are ramping up your training volume substantially, but you are not ramping down your work volume. Your career stays the same. You still have family, you still have the house, you still have and you're doing landscaping right now. Like you have a lot of things going on and you're ramping up training. So please tell me that you are not some sort of anomaly in this world, that you can continually ramp all this stuff up and just be fine. Like nothing else has changed. I'm sure something is giving in your life, right?
I'm just a robot, Jonathan.
Yeah.
No,
I'm sure though.
Right? It's a constant game of like levers, right? Like this goes up, this comes down. And for me, the big piece right now is the support from family. Jen, honestly, I'm working in the afternoons when I'd normally be off, like 7-8 p.m. But she sees that it's important to me and it's something that I wanted to try. So, we give there in order for like some short-term gains in the hours on the bike department. Luckily, she's a little more insane than I am and is training for a 100K run. So,
oh, wow.
there's plenty of time for a little bit of training overlap there, and definitely some empathy on my training and why I want to do it. Work is kind of, and same with this question, it's a stable, right? Like it takes the time it takes. I'm lucky to work for Specialized, which is a bike company, and everybody in the company, it feels, wants to see me succeed on the bike. So they're allowing me to like do those big training blocks and kind of work before and after. And I kind of shuffle that with time zones and meetings and such like that. As far as their question on how to adjust for heavy life stress is, like, if tax season, like, that's like not a variable, right? Like it's going to take this much time to do that. And then everything kind of has to build around that, would be my advice, is kind of what has to happen. And then kind of try to plan the training around that. So in my life, you know, the work has to happen. Jen and I are planning a wedding that has to happen. The landscaping has to happen. And then training kind of fits into that. And there's pieces like the time that Jen and I spend together that we're kind of fluctuating right now for those short-term gains. So just kind of adjust where you can. And then if where you're at in life only allows you to maintain or get an hour in here and there, like, that's just gonna have to be something you decide. Like if cycling is more important to you than that job, then it's a career change, right? Which sounds drastic, but it's really deciding what your priorities are. So it's like if that job's your number one priority, then it has to be treated that way, and then cycling has to fit around it. Whereas if you want to pursue something in cycling as your number one priority, then a job needs to fit around that priority. So just deciding a level of importance for each thing in your life and kind of how you can shuffle those.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that I think, you know, if it's something huge that's going on, I think the obvious answer is, hey, decrease your training, and that's fine. It's totally fine. But if it's a lot of little things, I think it's acknowledging that, like, this is life, and we all deal with those things all the time. And even professional athletes, we deal with those things. You know, our work is training, but we still deal with, you know, people getting in our immediate circle, getting ill or getting injured, or you know, whatever it might be. You deal with these life stresses. And if you're constantly waiting for the perfect time to train, it might not ever come. And so I think there's a big difference between experiencing life stress and feeling stress. And so my encouragement would be to try and find a way to take that stress and let that stress just be other things, variables, and don't internalize it. Still feel the joy. If you can only ride an hour, man, enjoy that hour. So yeah, don't let the training, don't let those other things cause stress. If they're there, they're there. And that's, the sooner you let it go, the more effective that time that you're training is going to be.
Yeah, it's super important to note that our body doesn't do a good job of filtering, like, oh, this isn't on the bike stress, so I'll not care about this at all. I can continue to lump on as much physical stress from training as possible because it's totally different. It's in a different bucket. It's oxidative stress. It affects our body adversely. So yeah, those are great tips. The one thing I can think of is that in many cases, for the majority of us, we get that training fills our cup. It empties it a bit, but it also fills it, and perhaps in different ways. And the key is to find some way to still allow it to fill your cup without emptying it otherwise. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see with this is if life becomes complicated, it's just, okay, 0 time on the bike whatsoever. That's like the first thing to drop. And that may be the right choice, depending on the scenario. I don't want to say that that's not, but don't let your inability to be perfect on a mid-volume plan stop you from just stepping down to a low-volume plan. You'll still get so much benefit by just stepping down and doing something rather than, you know, letting good be the enemy of great, right? And let yourself drop down to nothing.
Absolutely. There's a lot of steps between like perfect, which I think is an unattainable thing to begin with, and dropping the bike completely. I mean, I feel like most of us got on the bike because we love riding to begin with. So in those stressful weeks, it's like, maybe it's just getting on your bike for an hour and doing what you feel like. And that is going to relieve the stress, and it's like, just because you're not doing structure doesn't mean that like your fitness is just going to leave you in that week or 2 weeks. It may actually do better for you to just ride your bike and enjoy the simplicity of just riding.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that note, my reply to this would sound like it comes from a coach, but I have the luxury of being in both places, the coach and the athlete. I can say from a coaching perspective, maintain your consistency, which is an easy get for a number of reasons. But from the athlete perspective, I say maintain your consistency because, as Alex pointed out, it could be that one little period in each day or 3 times a week or 5 times a week, however many times you're on the bike, where you get that escape and you have that release. And as you pointed out, CX, if I can use your first name, it's you can't go deep. Don't go deep. You can't go deep. So get on the bike, alter the workout, maintain the consistency. If you don't have that same amount of time, then you don't go as long either. But keep the schedule, from the coaching perspective, because it'll just make it easier when you do reintegrate training into your lifestyle. And then from the athlete's perspective, keep your schedule, because that's the thing you do at that time of day. If it needs to be a little easier, a little shorter, so be it. But keep doing it, because you need that in a lot of ways.
A friend of mine who's a CPA and a mountain biker is pretty structured with his training throughout the year. And then when he gets to tax season, he doesn't he might reduce the amount of time that he spends on the bike, but he doesn't reduce the amount of rides that he does. And instead of training and having specific targets, he's just out on the trails, just enjoying himself. And that's just what he does. It means that he ends up probably spending 1 less hour at home when he takes that 1 hour ride. But for him, it's the balance that he needs, because work is making him crazy, and just being out on the mountain bike and enjoying it helps him. It's finding that individual balance, but you certainly don't feel bad about it. That's the last thing you need to do, is add more stress onto yourself for adjusting your training. Don't feel bad about that at all. So Chris's question, he says, I identify as a triathlete, but I think this question applies to endurance sports in general. In short, what's the purpose of a training camp? And how does one structure a training camp to be actually beneficial to fitness instead of digging a recovery hole? It's kind of the point of a training camp. That's the tricky part. But yes, we have 2 pros with us that are going to help us answer this one. Chris says, I've considered but never done week-long training camps. Forgive me. Apart from family commitments, the main reason for this is that I don't know enough to know how to do it properly on my own, being self-coached. So can you share some insight into how to have a good training camp and how it differs from just normal training? Chris also mentions, if it helps, he's 34-year-old male, married with a kid, and did his first Ironman pre-kid in 2019. Hannah, what would you say to this about like how to plan a training camp so you don't just end up worse off thereafter?
Yeah, I had quite a few notes on this. So Alex, jump in if you see anything in the moment. Don't just let me ramble. But I think the first I think the first thing to point out is part of the purpose of a training camp is an overreach. So in day-to-day training, this really ties in well to the epoch, is we try to pretty much only create stress that we can recover from. A lot of the time, most of the time before the next workout. So we're training, recovering, and we're slowly increasing our fitness in that way. And that prevents overtraining. So that's what we need to do. But in a training camp, it's a small amount of time. And so we can do what we call overreaching, which is a time period in which we temporarily increase our demand to the point in which we don't recover before the next workout. And we can only do this for a short period of time, because if we drag it on for a long period of time, it becomes overtraining. But if we do it for a short period of time, it can increase fitness gains fairly drastically. And then we hit a certain point where, yes, we do need to recover. But those gains were so great that it's worth that recovery. And so I think the first thing is simply acknowledging that, yeah, you are going to dig a little bit of a hole per se, but it's just how big is that hole? We want to make sure we can step out of it. So the first thing I'd say actually ties in well to the last question about stressors is, hey, don't schedule this training plan or this training camp when you have a ton of other stressors going on. It will not turn out well. You probably won't get in your workouts that you want. And the stress on the stress on the stress is too much stress. So, if your kid has, a super busy schedule one week and you're going to be driving them all over the place, don't try and put in your training camp that week. Just plan it when you can. Another point is plan the training camp when you have the time to recover, afterwards. Don't plan it right before a big race. You need to have time and you need to have flexibility for how long that recovery takes. I think after a training camp, you might need, if the training camp's not huge, it might be 2 or 3 days. I think ideally you probably shouldn't need to recover for more than a week after a training camp. If you need to recover for more than a week, someone else might jump in. But personally, I think you probably went too deep at that point. But I think, you said you've never done done week-long training camps. If you're only doing a week-long training camp, I would think that it would be very hard for you to put so much stress on your body that you dig a hole that you couldn't come out of. It's once you're doing a training camp that's, 2-3 weeks long that it becomes dangerous. And then my last comment would be to monitor yourself throughout the training camp. It's okay to pull the plug early if you start to feel too fatigued. It's okay to go out on your ride and start the warm-up and be like, whoa, I feel tired. And that's how I felt a lot of the training camp that I did this year. I'd start the warm-up and I'd be like, holy smokes, there is no way. But my coach and I had certain metrics that we used that, okay, it's okay if you feel tired, but if you're still hitting the numbers, you're still there and you're still making it happen. It's once you start, drastically failing those workouts, if you fail multiple workouts in a row, you're probably not benefiting a ton anymore. And it's time to pull the plug, hit the recovery button, and know that you've done the best that you can and you've put in the work for that camp.
Awesome. Yeah. Great advice. Alex, what would you add to this?
Hannah did a great job of outlining what the camp should be. So I think I'm going to approach this one in terms of how I do it, like with the job and everything, and what a training camp, I guess, means to me in my structure of training. And just, it's kind of a selfish week off that's solely focused on biking. So for me, I take the Monday through Friday off. I normally start it the Saturday and end it on the Sunday. So it's like 9 days. I normally go somewhere else. Last one I did was in Hawaii in 2020, I think, February, right before everything hit the fan. So for me, it's that whole week is just for bikes. Like anything that I need to do to recover, to, do well on the bike, everything's focused around hitting every workout. For me, that allows me to have a little more volume during that week, do a little more intensity. And it's right from one thing to the next. It's wake up, do gym, go for the ride, come back, lay down, do the boots, roll, get 10 hours of sleep, like just hit every mark. And like Hannah said, the benefit of that is that you get, 2 to 5 days to recover, and then you're good to go, and you get that bump of fitness. It's a nice way to kind of see what the body's capable of and have that opportunity. And I think for the job, it's important to take that time off. Like Hannah said, it's no point lumping all this stress on top of an already stressful week. And it tends to work out nicely because that week you return, like I said, those 2 to 5 days, which is normally the Monday through Friday, are super light or even off. So it's a good way to come back and be like, okay, I can kind of catch up on the things that I missed last week because I'm not on the bike very much this week.
Yeah. Chad, would you have anything to add to all of this in terms of the training camp?
Yeah, I do want to expand on one point that Hannah brought up, which is a super good point, is that at some point across a training camp, you may recognize that you're not positively responding anymore. And this is knowledge that you gain over time. So your first training camp, you don't know, you feel like hell and you still throw your leg over the saddle and go do the ride. But the more of these you do, or the more excesses and stress you expose yourself to, you're going to realize when it becomes unproductive. And unfortunately, you have to learn that in an unsettling manner. Is what it is. But if you've gained enough self-knowledge to know that I'm at that point where I need to shut things down, then shut it down. It doesn't matter if you typically carry 500-600 TSS per week and you're doing 1,000 TSS camp and you tell yourself, I should be able to do 1,000 TSS. It's a reach for me, but I can do this. And you're falling apart at 800 TSS, pull the plug, because just like she stated, anything between that 800 and 1,000 TSS isn't productive stress anyway. So you're really just beating yourself up for no good reason. And again, self-knowledge comes with time. So you're not going to know this right away. You have to build that basis of information, but don't just chase numbers. This is another instance of the metrics can only tell you so much. You do still have to listen to what you're feeling, what you're going with. And then, do pay attention to that on Alex's point, that return to real life. You may have a job where that week is, yes, your workouts are lighter and maybe you're off the bike for a period of time, but what if your job's super stressful? And I'm not saying you'll have this luxury, but if you can tie a couple extra days of recovery onto that trip, such that you're not at work, such that you end the camp early, or you just have a couple extra days padding such that you can truly recover for those initial couple of days, so that when you do return to work, you're useful and can make your recovery kind of progress over the course of that week, all the better.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kind of akin to a finance analogy. Like if you want to buy $100 thing, you don't wait until your net worth gets to 100 and then spend it all of a sudden, right? That would be silly, because you know that bills are going to come, expenses are going to come thereafter. And it's the same thing. You want to make sure that you have plenty of padding and then be able to absorb everything that you can. So don't plan that training camp that you can't recover from. That's an important detail. And if the training camp needs to be 3 days, that's okay. If that's a novel stimulus for you, then that's productive. If it needs to be 2 weeks because you're used to doing this sort of thing, then that's what it is too. These concepts can scale. There isn't, the only critical mass that you're hoping to achieve is, like what Hannah said in the beginning, is get yourself to the point where you have novel stimulus. It's more than what you are used to being able to handle. Thusly, it's going to push your capabilities more, but only if you can recover from it. So yeah, important details. Let's go into next question. What signs or signals to look for to know when it is the right time to increase your training volume? This is like everyone kind of we all want this metric that's basically like, ding, time to level up, right? And like you can do more, but it's not that simple. If only that were the case. And also, once again, we've talked about this multiple times. I want to normalize adjusting your training volume throughout a year and throughout any period of time. It's okay to have times when you can train more, and it's okay to have times when you train less as well. You don't have to be like this, just always up and to the right graph that you're always doing there. What signs would you look for, Hannah, and to say that like you could, and perhaps maybe advising an amateur athlete is different than a professional athlete like yourself here, but what signs did you look for to increase training volume?
Yeah, I would say, I said it earlier, is you can only train as hard as you can recover. So I think for this question, if you're recovering fully between every workout and you can increase the training volume and still recover, go for it. But if you are going to increase the volume, and I can get in a 2-hour ride, but then I'll have 15 minutes to shower and get to the office. And then when I get home, I'll have to, it's too much. And I think a lot of endurance athletes in particular, we're type A people. We can schedule things down to the minute. We have it so dialed. And so I know a lot of people are like, I can put in a 20-hour week. Okay, you have 20 hours physically available and now you're sleeping 4 hours. This doesn't make sense. So I think, I'd love to give a very specific metric, and maybe someone else here will, but I think for me, it is asking yourself very honestly, do I have the time to recover physically and mentally from these volumes?
Alex, what say you, being a person that is currently increasing their training volume substantially?
I think again, Hannah like nailed it for the amateur. So I guess I'll just kind of share my personal experience on why I increased my volume. And it was just like, if you look at like the stimulus, I now need to see fitness gains or to like get to the next level, like the TSS required in a week is X, right? And if I did that in 14 hours versus 20 hours, then the load is very different. And to Hannah's point, the recovery is very different. So it's like I could do a lot of high intensity sessions to get it in 14 hours, and that may not be able to recover from because they're just such hard workouts. Or I can increase the volume and do more 4 and 5 hour endurance rides and then sprinkle in those intensity days and achieve a higher TSS. And it's not something that happened overnight. It was through a lot of discussions with my coach and other coaches and just athletes in general on their experience with volume and how like they kind of push up against limits. And for me, it was just, if not now, when kind of thing. It was just, if I don't ever try it, I'll regret it. And if I try it and fall flat on my face, then I'm okay with that as well. So it was something that was worth a try, because for me, and with that, I don't want it to sound pompous, but I think for the majority of people, they're not pushing up against their limits currently within their constraints. So and for me, the limit was probably just the time on the bike. And so I was acknowledging that and realizing that I could attempt to get to the next level through this way. Also with my physiology, like at Leadville, like 4 hours in, Mr. 4 hours, I guess, like just a light switch, just
you're saying
gone.
Not us. Yeah.
It was just
you're
I fell off a cliff.
Longer stuff. So it's, you need that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And then even in XC, there's a lot to show that volume helps even in a 90-minute workout, which logically for me took a long time to fully understand why I need to ride 5 hours to go fast for 90 minutes. But
particularly at your level, right? Because that kind of decouples for a lot of us amateurs, in the sense that like you said, we're probably not bumping up against those limits like you are bumping up against those limits, because you're racing at World Cup level. So that's the best of the best, whereas the majority of us are not racing at World Cup level. It's a bit different.
Well, in this conversation, I think the majority of us are.
That's true. We have a weird, we have a weird makeup here, don't we? Chad, did you have something to add in on this one?
Yeah, it's really simple. It's when your workout stops scaring you. And it sounds like I'm trying to be clever, but I'm not. I mean, if you look at your workout, if you look at everything that's laid out for you, especially breakthroughs or just your harder, higher quality workouts, and you're not a little bit worried about them, it's time to up adjust, because you've adapted. And not just psychologically, even psychologically, you can get plenty toughened up to the point where this is going to be a hard workout, but I know I can do it based on what I've done before, as opposed to, I don't know if I can do that. Mm-hmm. That is worrisome, but I'm going to give it my best.
You said that, Chad, because next week has 2 of those.
Every week should have those, unless it's a recovery week. You have to be challenged. Otherwise you're not progressing. You're not improving. So if you've reached a point where you're comfortable with everything that's on your menu for the week ahead of you, it's time to ask yourself, is this really all I can do?
And the only thing I would add is it's only to, I guess, modify a bit of what Hannah said or add to it. I think for me in my life, the best indication that I could increase my training volume would be a decrease in work or family or otherwise life stress. If I saw a decrease in stress, like income streams, so to speak, in other areas, I would say, okay, I can increase the stress coming from the training side. That's how I personally view it, because I can do, like, I've done high volume training this year. And I think that some of that training is water landing on a saturated sponge, in the sense that I have enough stress coming in from all aspects of life that I'm not getting that full benefit, causing me to even think that I might get more benefit out of doing mid-volume training that maybe pushes the needle up a bit more, less in terms of time, but is more specific, perhaps. I don't know. So I've been following like the polarized plans that we have and testing out those, and then a combination of going back and forth between different blocks but following them to completion. And it's been really educational this year to go through that and to see that my body doesn't respond fully to just, the traditional polarized format, that it needs something else, but that also that polarized format's a great way to get in a lot of overall stress, but perhaps not the specific stress that I need to really move the needle where I need it. If I didn't have, a normal life in the sense that, with all the different responsibilities that could cause stress, then maybe it would be different. So it's all worth considerations.
The importance of the fluidity comes into, like, work stress kind of goes like this, and so does life stress. To Hannah's point, you never know, what's going to happen with people in your circle or anything in life. And I think kind of rolling with those punches, but also understanding their effect and being able to adapt to that. I think as professional athletes everyone in the last, 16 months it's the name of the game has been adaptability. Like, is that race going to happen? Is it not? Am I going to be able to go there? And I think the athletes that have succeeded are ones that really enjoy the process too. So it's like, I think this is a fun part of it. I think Jonathan and I were talking about my increase in volume, and it's like, it was a fun challenge because it's somewhere between, I know I can achieve it and a BHAG. It was like, maybe I'll just not be able to do that much training, but let's just see. Yeah,
absolutely. Let's go into Jolt's question. And then after that, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I looked it up. It would seem that it's a Hungarian name, and I'm not fluent in Hungarian. So with that said, Jolt's question, and then we're going to go into just a couple live questions that y'all have submitted. He says, I just started using TrainerRoad recently and absolutely loving it. Adaptive training is awesome. That's good to hear, Jolt. Exciting stuff. My question is related to RPE and training benefits of workouts done indoor versus outdoor. If I do a sweet spot or threshold session indoors, my heart rate during my workout is way higher than outdoors. Probably as a consequence, my RPE is higher as well. If I do the very same workout outdoors, the HR and RPE are much lower. In other words, for me, threshold workouts outdoors are hard, whereas indoors are usually very hard or almost all out. Same power meter, same power numbers, he mentions. He says, assuming that I can hold the same power, but with a different average heart rate and RPE, am I getting the same training benefits from these two sessions? He also says, P.S., most probably the increase in heart rate indoors is due to lack of proper cooling and such, but I can only do so much about it. I have a small space without sufficient fans. And he also says that he catches colds pretty easily, so he doesn't want to just completely freeze himself. So, Joel, this is a great point that you recognize the fact of why the inside sessions are harder. And yeah, cooling is huge. And we can't cool ourselves off enough when we're indoors in order to be able to really kind of get close to an apples to apples comparison. So, but over time, you'll get to the point where you're able to hit the same numbers indoor and outdoor. It just takes time. That said, his question isn't about indoor and outdoor as much as, if my training feels harder, is it more productive? That's kind of the root of the question with this. So what do you think on this one, Hannah?
Yeah, this is such a common question. So I think if you're hitting the same numbers, then you're having the same muscular strain, in the same way that if you decide, oh, well, this feels harder, so I'm going to lower my numbers, you're not getting the same muscular strain. So if you want to maintain that muscular strain, you do need to hit the numbers on the trainer. That said, if your heart rate is way higher, you're getting a different cardiovascular strain. You're no longer, sweet spot's a great example. If your heart rate is above your threshold heart rate, it's not a sweet spot workout. So all of a sudden your muscular strain, your cardiovascular strain are on two different levels. So it does become a little bit of a sticky situation there. And you have to kind of boil it down to, what is the goal of this workout and what am I trying to achieve? I would say, for that overarching question of if it feels harder, am I getting more? I'm pretty tempted to say no in this instance, because, there isn't a prize just for being really uncomfortable. And that's something that I think about on the trainer and in the winter a lot, because you'll get really hot and people like to, hashtag toughness training. And I feel like that's about all you're getting is a little bit of toughness. There's no prize for being super, super cold or, sweating gallons of water throughout the ride. So really avoid the temptation to just suffer and try and find a way to hit those numbers while feeling, your normal sensations. And two of the things I would point out for that is, one, if I don't know what trainer you're using, but if you're not using a direct drive trainer, I think some power can be dissipated. And so there is a chance that your numbers actually are a couple percentage different on that type of trainer. And then also ask yourself what your riding style is. If you're doing VO2 max intervals or something like that, and outside you would typically be standing and throwing the bike from side to side, that is a little bit different than on a trainer where you might be doing more of a seated power effort. So just some things to consider and think about, and see how you can make it more of a similar situation for the strain on your body and your perceived exertion.
Chad, this is kind of like the catch-22 with heat training, right? In the sense that, if you make your indoor training environment super hot, or you train outside in crazy heat, that's a way to get heat training, but at what cost, right? It could compromise other things.
Yeah. So all of this, I can only help look at it from a physiology perspective. I mean, you're up against heat that you're not surmounting effectively, and maybe hydration's an issue. Maybe you, for whatever reason, when you do an indoor workout, you don't address your hydration as seriously as when you do an outdoor workout. It's probably not
common,
but
actually, strangely. Yeah, it's strangely common.
So look
kind of like what Hannah said. We just, for some reason, endeavor to make indoor training even harder than it needs to be.
It's going to suck anyway. How can I make it worse? Yeah. But maybe, maybe you're doing something differently outside of what you're looking at, doing indoor and outdoor workouts. But all of this really, to me, smacks of you're not cooling effectively. Mm-hmm. And I know you're concerned with colds, but just try to, sanitize your hands and avoid contact with people immediately after, and nourish well and recover well, but improve your cooling. Because I really think what you're coming up against is you're just hot, and it's super hard to work as hard as your capabilities will allow when you're not hot.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think that the majority of athletes that I find are more recovery constrained, honestly, than anything else. So when you're adding on additional stress to make it harder, that doesn't necessarily make it better. Now, when we're talking about indoor. Sorry, go ahead, Chad. Yeah.
Well, as Hannah pointed out, there's no real benefit. You're not improving your cardiovascular system, or your muscular system, your pulmonary system. Nothing's really benefiting from this. Arguably, you're getting tougher. So maybe neurally or psychologically, there is a benefit. And I won't pretend that doesn't matter. It absolutely does. But I don't think that's the aim of these workouts. I don't think you're going into these saying, I'm going to work on muscle endurance and just being tougher. That comes part and parcel. That's going to happen anyway. You don't need to make it, as she said, tougher for the sake of making it tougher. Figure out how to make the workout productive with minimizing the misery.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate one detail in the beginning. This is, we're talking generally about just making your workouts hard in any way. That could be you riding outside and riding in a rain jacket in the summer, just trying to I don't know, make things hotter and sweatier, whatever it might be. You don't always have to just find ways to make things harder. In the context of indoor training, we've talked about this at length, and you can go onto our blog where we have detailed walkthroughs and guides on how to get the most out of indoor training, how to make it so that you're achieving balance between indoor and outdoor, right? Sufficient cooling, sufficient fueling, making sure that you're, if you have a, like Hannah said, super important. If you have a direct drive trainer where you're able to actually ride in the sort of gear that you ride in when you're riding outside. If you have a trainer that has really low inertia feel to it, or you're training in your smallest gear, but then you go outside and you're used to riding and crits at like 30 miles an hour, man, you are going to be in for a very different experience when you're training with something like that. So there are a lot of different things. We'll post some links in the forum in this thread to actually some great resources. And Jesse might even already be on it in the live chat here on YouTube, where you can find some guides so that you can bridge that gap and make them the same. Because indoor training isn't less effective because it might feel harder. Number one, you're going to adapt to that. Number two, you have maybe even more room for productivity because you can be so specific and so structured with it. So, but don't seek to make your training harder than it needs to be. Just seek to hit your numbers. That's what matters.
The other thing I'll add from a cooling standpoint is if you're a little not sure about the fan, at least make sure you have a really good towel or towels. I'm a super heavy sweater, so I don't know if other people experience this, but when I'm on the trainer, if the fan isn't doing it for me, I'll sweat so much that my body won't evaporate it off well. And so I'll just have sweat staying on me. And sometimes actually in the winter, when this gets really bad, I'll experience heat rash because that sweat isn't evaporating. And so for me, it's really important to have a towel and to be wiping it off constantly. And that helps me a lot mentally, physically, the whole range for monitoring the heat. And sometimes that means having more than one towel, and you feel ridiculous, but you also feel better. So it's worth it.
That's a really good point, because it's basically a superficial envelope of heat that you can't dissipate. So fans are all good and fine. Evaporative cooling is all good and fine. Sweating is all good and fine when they all work together. But if you take one of those elements out and you're just holding that barrier, basically, that's preventing heat dissipation because you don't have evaporative cooling washing over you, sweat doesn't work in your favor. If you have good cooling, or really just good airflow across your body, then that evaporative cooling works a treat. But if you don't have that, I think we see fans as being a method for cooling us, that we feel the cool air in our face, and that's the benefit, but it's the evaporation that takes place. So you have to use the fan so that the evaporation is taking place.
And that's
otherwise wipe it off your body. Yeah,
that's why it's important to cover as much of the surface area of your body as possible with flowing air, because when you're outside, you have that flowing air at all times. And when you're in an extremely humid environment, it's kind of what you experience indoors. Cooling has to happen with gradients, right? You have to have something hot, and then you have to have something cold. And then there's that cold, that's where the heat will travel, right? So that's why when we sweat and we evaporate and it cools the surface of the skin, it allows us to pull heat from our bodies outward. If your sweat is not evaporating, it is not cooling, and that gradient doesn't exist. So it's, and then on top of that, you can also create if you're in a small space, you can create such a humid environment that you also lose that humidity gradient too. You're basically, training in water. So then no evaporation is going to happen. I know this is really gross, but
minimize the misery. That's really do that, and you can work harder.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of anybody who can just use one towel. That sounds nice.
Yeah. Alex is a really heavy sweater too. And salt, you lose a lot of sodium when you sweat too, right?
Yeah. Just need to start having white kits because
Yeah.
It's getting out of hand.
Actually, don't do it. Your white kits will look disgusting like mine do already. So yeah, don't do it. Can we get into some live questions? Just a handful of them. And then we're going into overtime here, and then we'll be good. Okay. Let's go into this one from Sariko. He says, are you familiar with any races that happen under sea level? And if there is, would you train differently, or the elevation effects are only when going higher? So I have never heard of any races that only exist underneath or below sea level. I can think of like a couple spots that would be possible. He mentions the Dead Sea as being one of them. But no, I don't think you train differently at all. Right, Chad?
Yeah, I would just recognize that air pressure is not going to be a concern. So you're going to be completely oxygen. I don't know what it is, but you're going to have plenty of oxygen. So
yeah,
it wouldn't be a concern. And there's no reason you would train in anticipation of an oxygen surplus.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you'd notice it either at 400 feet below sea level.
Not. Yeah. That's good.
Right. Would you notice it going from 0 to 500 feet? Probably not. Like plus 500, 0 to negative 400. I'm not sure you'd notice it either. So
fair.
This next one I want to direct toward Hannah with your tri background. So it says, could commuting on a fixie help with training for a triathlon more so than a normal road bike? I have a 25-mile commute, and I'm curious if this would be beneficial. Thanks so much.
I actually think commuting on a fixie would be more beneficial for, say, a mountain biker, because a fixie is going to require you to vary your pace or your torque on the pedals so greatly, depending on the terrain, that you're going to be recruiting more fast twitch muscle fibers in theory to go across whatever terrain you're doing and change your cadence so much across that as well. So for a triathlete who you're trying to be really steady, you're probably very type 1 muscle fiber across the board. I would just I would just stick with the road bike.
Yeah. I wouldn't ride the Fixie too, just because if you're doing tri training and you're running and that's quite a lot of stress on your knees, and then you're riding the bike and who knows, that might be stress on your knees. If you're doing mobility and stuff, that could be helpful, but Fixies are pretty rough on your knees. It introduces a totally novel, experience, I'm saying in air quotes, for your knees, like trying to slow down unless you got brakes on there. But
Hannah pointed out something interesting, is that we always look at Fixies as a challenge for cadence. We're going to be forced into different cadences that we're not well suited to, but really it's a torque challenge. I mean, those cadences all bring with them different torque. So if you're not capable or don't need to be capable of varying your torque across a wide spectrum, then I'm not sure if Fixie makes good sense.
And triathlon in particular, predominantly, not across the board, but you typically will have a course that isn't going to have as great of fluctuations as would say something like a road race in terms of gradient. You'd be able to probably self-select a whole lot more. This next one's from Matt, and this requires like 7 episodes of deep dives to really get down to the bottom of this one, Matt, but just the same. We'll kind of give like a brief overview of some things. He says, what can cause a struggle with the first interval within a set, even being a couple of sets in? I also struggle with getting up to speed the first lap of a cyclocross race, even after a quality warm-up. There's so many things, right, Chad, that this could be?
Yeah, first off, uptake kinetics. I mean, we talked about that at that in depth. And then secondly, just the quality of your warm-up, and maybe the type of athlete and muscle. Either way, I like to, if I find that this is an issue and I have the luxury of adding more time to the warm-up, I like to warm up longer and more gradually. And then I want to incorporate some efforts that are somewhat similar to the efforts that I have to dole out over the course of the workout. So you can get pretty specific with your warm-up, and it can benefit very directly the quality of the intervals that follow.
Yeah. The other things that I'm thinking of too, very well could be just your ability, your body's, how your body is processing glucose, right? If you're the sort of person that just responds slower to that whole process, particularly with race warmups, then, it might take you, even though you think it's a quality warmup, you might still be in the process where your body has not quite responded to that glucose demand that the muscles are calling for in terms of liberating those resources and making them readily available. It takes some, in my case, it takes like 35, 40 minutes until my body actually starts to really liberate that, at least what I've found. So that's more than I would have thought of. I would have thought that I would be riding and then within 10, 15 minutes, boom, I'm firing and I've got, basically a sugar river in my blood, but not that case. So, and that varies for each person. So could be so many things. Okay. The last, or we're going to cover 2 more. Tristan says, how do you not burn out? And if you're feeling like you're going to, what are you doing to not get that burnout? I say we let the pros answer this one because you have to train quite a lot. Mm-hmm. Alex, how about you?
Ride my mountain bike on dirt. Take care of the mental side of recovery. If I feel like I'm going to burn out, one, take a look at your training, because normally mental informs physical. And if you're not feeling it, there could be a reason of residual fatigue or one reason or another. So you might just need a few easy days to recover from that. But yeah, go do a fun mountain bike ride with my brother.
Yeah. Nice. Hannah.
Yeah, I think Alex nailed it from the fun standpoint. I think it's about finding that joy and having fun. I also think that people talk about burnout a lot nowadays. And so I've heard a lot, especially young athletes, have fear of the elusive burnout. Just in terms of they're like, oh yeah, my coach says if I ride this much, I'm going to burn out. But they don't have any feelings of burnout. They're just scared that it might happen. And while every fear is always valid, I would just say, don't be afraid of something you're not feeling. If you're enjoying those rides and you're having fun, it's great. Don't fear something you're not feeling yet.
Yeah. I'd also add, I take 2 weeks off, completely off the bike every year, and that's physical as much as mental. And I think that helps fight burnout. Like that first week, I'm normally just like, sweet, Popeyes, I hate bikes, this is great. And then the second week, it's like, can I ride my bike already?
Yeah.
So
one thing I would say is novelty. Sometimes it's less a burnout on the bike in general, but more if you're doing like a specific type of work and you've been doing that for an extended period of time, you just need something novel sometimes, and it's not time away from the bike. So I've planned in flex weeks every 6 to 8 weeks in my training. And that allows me to decide if I need that to recover, or if I need that to just continue doing what I'm doing, or do a specific type of training. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Those have been really helpful for me.
That's a great point. I actually also think of it like if you're doing the same workout over and over again and you're like burned out on that workout, like ask your coach to have another workout that's still getting after that same thing. Like if you're trying to do sweet spot better, or your threshold or VO2, there's multiple different ways a workout can be structured to get through it. And I did an inside workout, and I appreciated Chad's attention to how a workout flowed. Like I think it was 4 by 20-minute intervals, and then the rests in between changed intensities. Mm-hmm. So it was like 260, and then the next one it was 240. I was like, yes, 240. And then it was like, then you got to get through the 260, and then the recovery was 240. So it's just kind of like mentally how you get through a workout can change it too.
And the way to do that with TrainerRoad too, there's workout alternates. So whatever workout you have, there are alternates for it. If you go into the app and you look at it, it'll say like, here's a similar workout that'll deliver a similar stimulus in the end, but do go about it in a different way. You can also use Train Now too, and you can hit that shuffle button, that little refresh button, and it will give you other workouts that fall within that if you need that change up. It's super helpful. The last one, this one is for me. It says, can Jonathan comment on his decision to skip Park City point to point due to the air quality? Was there a specific no-go number? And that part I didn't cover. And yeah, my no-go number was above 85. So if it was above 85, I was going to cut it because I figured that at that point I might spend potentially hours exposing myself to like, somewhere around a 120 AQI at that race. And I don't know what that will do for my long-term health. I don't know. Endurance athletes, especially when you're talking about that level of exercise, you're breathing in a lot more than what AQI recommendations are based on. So AQI recommendations, when it's talking about healthy, unhealthy, or hazardous, all that stuff, it's not thinking that you're going to be an endurance athlete just huffing and puffing, breathing extremely deeply that whole time. So, and additionally, these are the PM 2.5, the smallest particulates are the ones that are the most high right now, particularly with forest fire smoke. If you look, you can break it down with most AQI apps and see what is causing it. That's the highest one. You breathe that deeply down into your lungs, and we just don't know what happens. So it was an individual choice. I don't think that the event organizer did anything wrong by holding the event, because for the majority of the day, it was just below 100, I think, for their reading that they had. So I don't mean to cast aspersions or anything else like that. It was just a personal choice that I don't want to do that. With Cape Epic being so close, what if that gave me some sort of respiratory infection, and then I had that ruining my training for the next 4 weeks leading into Cape Epic? That would be a shame. So,
and then Keegan had one too, didn't he? Didn't you have a no-go number?
The same number, actually.
Okay.
We were talking about this for quite some time, even long before we did that deep dive. And then also once we did that deep dive and he was on that episode, and then we were basically staying together there too in Park City. So we were waiting to see what it was. So,
so he didn't race then.
Yeah, he didn't race. So it's probably up to each person to pull that. I was an asthmatic as a child, and I've had multiple asthma attacks as an adult on the bike in different circumstances. I've had 3, I think. Keegan was also an asthmatic, and he's had issues with that too. So that also affects my consideration. I lost a friend when I was a young kid to an asthma attack, and ever since then, that's been something that's been that marked me as a young kid having to go through that. So I don't like messing with that stuff. So something I could control was deciding to not race it, and instead we found a clean pocket of air. So yeah, up to what everybody wants to do, but that was my choice. Cool. This has been an awesome episode. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to have to have you back regularly, just as we have Alex on, I should say semi-regularly. It's fantastic having you. Thank you for bringing so much to the podcast.
Thank you. This was super fun.
Yeah. For people that want to get in touch with Hannah, you can find her on Instagram. It's at Hannah_Finchamp. She puts out awesome training tip Tuesdays that she does that are like fantastic. You put one out on breathing this week that kind of went in line with a lot of what we were talking about. It's just great. So go over there and give Hannah a follow. and follow and support her at races. She's racing the Snowshoe World Cup. You can catch that on Red Bull TV. That'll be next weekend. Exciting stuff. So, and Alex, thanks for joining us. I'm curious to see if you're just like a skeleton after maintaining this training volume through Marathon World Championships. So,
which is when?
Yeah, when
October 2nd.
Okay.
And it's in Elba, right? An island off of Italy. Is that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be exciting to hear about. So, all right. And thanks, Chad. Appreciate you coming on as always, delivering the deep dive.
You're welcome. Sure thing.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.